The protagonist of this story longed for a new life, but things did not turn out as she expected. A boy named Caleb, with silver hair and red eyes, became very attached to her, which revealed his ducal origin. And he begged Elia not to divorce his older brother, Cedric Indigenia, who was just entering the room. Elia and Cedric had a contract marriage, and it was about to end. But Caleb did not want to part with his sister-in-law and started making excuses for her to stay. For example, that without her Cedric would become a complete idiot, so careless that he cut off a finger. And the boy was also afraid to sleep without her. He was convinced that a monster was hiding under his bed. However, Caleb's spirit was the most powerful in this universe, and the monster under his bed, it is a great evil that became his strength. The young duke is destined to be a gravity mage and master of darkness. While he begged Elia to stay, his brother asked him to stop whining. She is already in trouble. The girl noticed in her husband's eyes the clear intention to take the baby out of the room, and she hugged him so he wouldn't be scared. But Cedric grabbed his brother by the neck, like a naughty kitten, and pulled him away from his wife. He explained that his actions and pleas would change nothing. The boy, obviously, became furious, twisting his face into a grimace of disgust, and he broke free from his older brother's hands. Then, in a lecturing tone, he scolded Cedric, considering him the biggest idiot in the world. He demanded that they not abandon Elia, but the older brother didn't want that either. Although circumstances demand it, Elia got fed up with the argument and shouted at both of them to shut up immediately. She didn't understand what was wrong with those brothers, nor why they were fighting out of nowhere. It all began when the heroine woke up in someone else's body and looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't understand anything. First, she thought it was a dream and blinked and shook her head. But nothing changed. The girl realized that she had reincarnated into a character from the novel she was reading, but she remembered nothing about it. She obtained information by finding a diary and discovering she was Elia, 23 years old. And since the author barely wrote about her, she was surely a secondary character. But with nothing to do, the girl decided to take a look, and upon looking out the window, she only saw forests. It was even a bit romantic. The birds were singing. A cool breeze caressed her face. The weather was wonderful, and Elia decided to walk around this amazing world she found herself in. Sitting under a tree, she tried again to understand what kind of character she had reincarnated into. Nothing came to mind, so she decided not to dwell on it anymore. After all, this place is great, and the opportunity to live again, even in another body, is not given to everyone. The young woman continued exploring the wooded area, trusting that nothing bad was going to happen. Along the way, she ran into several little creatures, so adorable they made you want to touch them. But they wouldn't let themselves be petted and fled instantly. This didn't bother Elia. She was happy to be able to breathe fresh air and walk through such a wonderful forest. Suddenly, she heard a scream, as if someone was fleeing from something or someone. When she turned around, Elia saw a child being chased by a wolf, which was at least twice as large. Instinctively, Elia wanted to save the little one and shouted at him to hide behind her. Her request seemed a bit strange to the boy. After all, she was just a girl, not very tall, but she repeated for him to hide, although she herself felt atrocious fear. However, she could not abandon that adorable creature and decided to try to scare the wolf away. Gathering all her courage to protect the child, Elia, aware that she could die again, glared at the predator, which looked terrifying. Its red eyes seemed to reflect the anger of the entire world, and with its sharp fangs, it was ready to sink them into human skin. Elia's soul once again fled to her heels, but then she noticed that the wolf was jumping as if in slow motion. She decided to take advantage of the opportunity and, using a technique, kicked it in the stomach. The wolf flew away and fell heavily to the ground, but then it didn't move. Elia surprised herself, not believing she had become strong enough to knock out such a beast with the first blow. In any case, the wild animal was dealt with, and now the boy is safe. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief and confess to the little one that she had also been very scared. And he, with a serene face, thanked her for saving him, promising that he would definitely repay her for this. But a little later, because right now he has no way to do so. It was only now, noticing the boy's face, that Aaliyah remembered her younger brother. So much like him, this little one was like 2 drops of water, identical to her brother Uni. The girl even thought that he too had reincarnated into the novel, but in his own body, although it seemed impossible. But then the rescued boy objected, saying that his name was not Uni, that he was the great duke of the imperial family of the Appriants, and his name was Caleb Indigentia. Elia was somewhat shocked, but now the puzzle pieces in her head were beginning to fit together. She remembered that this child was the personification of the dark side of the novel she had read. In her past life, she only had her brother Junie, who had to spend time in the hospital due to a rare illness. However, he bravely endured the treatment, while his sister, a member of the national taekwondo team, promised her brother she would win a gold medal, and he looked forward to it eagerly. Time flew by, and the day came when the girl won the coveted gold medal. They were both overjoyed that everything had turned out well, and now they could stop worrying about money. The girl dreamed of sending him to the best hospital, but for Junji, that was the last day of his life. For our heroine, this was a terrible blow. It turns out the doctors knew he didn't have much time left, but the boy asked them not to tell his sister anything. And after losing her brother, the girl began to spend time on all sorts of media. She became addicted to the internet because she wanted to escape reality. And one day, by chance, she stumbled upon an advertisement for a web novel that seemed interesting, and she started reading it. The cover caught the girl's attention, a dark face identical to Junie among the people. That's why the heroine was instantly interested in the novel, and now that face was right in front of her. Caleb assumed she saved him because she mistook him for a certain Junie and apologized for not being him. But even his voice was identical to that of her little brother from her past life. And this boy didn't seem evil now. He even promised that she could ask for whatever she wanted for saving him. He added that he was a little injured. Otherwise, he would have dealt with the wolf with magic himself. The fact that the little one was injured visibly worried Elia. Only now did she notice blood on his hand and became very frightened. Although the wound was insignificant, the girl took his hand to examine it and noticed other red stains on his palm. Finally, she suggested going to her nearby cottage, where she planned to bandage his wound. First, she bandaged his hand with a handkerchief and received another expression of gratitude. Then she showed him the right direction, but noticed that the boy was limping slightly. He probably twisted his ankle while fleeing the predator, but Caleb assured her it didn't hurt at all. This didn't reassure the girl much, and she asked him to let her know if it hurt. The little one even felt a bit embarrassed to be in that state in front of the lady. It might seem that Aaliyah scolded him, but she was simply worried about him. At that moment, she remembered something from the novel, that Caleb suffered from a certain lack. For some reason, he was not liked by the vassals, and they always subjected him to strict standards. But the girl only saw an adorable child and did not understand why others hated him. In the original novel, the reason for this was not analyzed, but due to those demands. The boy is probably discouraged, even though he is from a ducal family. Elia felt the desire to protect him. After all, he is just a child, surrounded by cruel people. And when he said it didn't hurt, it brought back memories of her brother Junie, who said the same thing. The girl turned her back and squatted down, asking him to climb onto her. Caleb didn't understand what she wanted at first, so she explained that she would carry him because his feet hurt. And again, the boy insisted that he felt no pain and could walk on his own. Exactly like Yoonji claimed he didn't hurt walking by himself. Looking at Caleb, Elia assured him that she just wanted to help, and there was nothing shameful about it. And she asked him to see her as a sister, because there is nothing wrong with a little brother riding on his sister's back. Later, looking at his bandaged fingers, Caleb regretted not having a magic wand to heal himself. And on top of that, he received cocoa from the last bit of cocoa powder from his savior. She served herself plain water, because there wasn't enough for a second portion. The boy thanked her again for her care, and Elia was touched by the child, who lives in a world that will soon descend into terror. But then, she became curious to know why on earth she was with Caleb. He is the most important character, and she is secondary, but now the crucial thing is for him to get better. And while she watched him drink tenderly, her stomach suddenly roared like a lion. Realizing he was hungry and not admitting it, she unintentionally scolded him again, especially since he mentioned that he had been wandering in the forest since dawn, and it is already 5 in the afternoon. Now her mission was to feed Caleb, but she was surprised by his confession that he doesn't have dinner. The boy didn't want to gain weight to look good at events. That's what his teacher told him. It seemed to Elia that this boy was only suffering abuse. He was still a child, and they were already rationing his food. She felt an enormous urge to finish off the miserable person who subjected the child to such a strict diet. But now she understood why Caleb had seemed so light when she carried him. Asking Caleb to wait a moment, Elia started preparing something, mentally cursing that teacher. The only ingredient in the house turned out to be potato, but with it, the girl prepared several dishes. She even felt a little ashamed for not being able to give the child something tastier, and he was just amazed that she managed to prepare everything so quickly, as if using magic. Elia had simply gotten used to doing it in her life and asked the little one to taste quickly. And during dinner, in 20 minutes, she convinced Caleb not to listen to the teacher and to eat well. Caleb's food turned out quite edible, although he noticed it was spicier than usual. Then the girl offered the boy French fries. Judging by his face, it seemed like he had never seen them before. Caleb agreed to try them, only asking that she not give them to him with a spoon. And while chewing, Elia watched with fascination the pleasure reflected on his face. The taste truly seemed incredible and unforgettable to him. The girl promised to prepare them later, but for that she had to go the next day for ingredients. As evening fell, Caleb sank into a deep sleep. When he opened his eyes the next morning, he saw that the sun was high and feared he had overslept. Then he was confused when he didn't see the familiar walls, and looking around, he understood that he was still at Elia's house. Still, the boy didn't think he should sleep so much, although he was glad his body could rest. He couldn't believe he had fallen asleep like that. Before, after an incident, he couldn't sleep all night. After that day, when a guy committed a heinous murder. And just now, Elia returned with a sack on her shoulder, hoping Caleb had rested upon seeing her. The girl didn't want to wake him up in the morning, and in the meantime, she had gone to buy provisions. And today, for lunch, she was going to prepare a delicious meat stew for her little guest. Rubbing his eyes, Caleb began to recall how Elia had saved him yesterday from a fierce wolf. She killed it with one blow and can also heal wounds. That young lady seemed simple, yet charming and like a little angel. Caleb also liked that she cooked well and would like to get to know her better. But if he starts asking questions, Elia will also start asking questions. And he doesn't want to tell anything about himself. The boy only asked her to wake him up early tomorrow. If he overslept again, he explained that he couldn't get up late, but it seemed very strange to Elia. And she began to ask him the reason, since she has no schedule here. And she sees nothing wrong with a child getting enough sleep. Her house is not a grand duchy, so as long as Caleb is her guest, he doesn't have to follow those silly rules. Here he is a normal child, who can eat, play, or sleep peacefully as much as he wants. The boy was a little confused, and Elia stroked his head and asked him not to hesitate to play like a normal child. At that moment, in the boy's eyes, this girl looked like a heroine. In this short time, he discovered many of her talents, and yet, she remained very sweet. Moreover, no one had petted him like that before, the way she did. Then, Elia asked him to wash up and come eat. And he still couldn't believe he could be a normal boy, not a duke with tons of duties. They constantly told him he should behave like an adult, and they hit his hands with a ruler for disobeying. And that instilled in him that he should not do what Elia told him. But her words made him happy. Even her preparing chamomile tea instead of cocoa for him. Today's meal was also very pleasing to him. Elia was happy to have managed to quell the child's hunger. Caleb was getting lost in his feelings. This girl seemed amazing to him, something he confessed. And she, because this boy resembled Yoonghee, felt like she had known him for many years. At that moment, Caleb felt the desire to tell her about himself, and also to know more about her. The request was harmless, but Elia didn't know how to reveal herself to him, and asked him to be the first to tell his life story. Even though Elia had read the novel about him, she was curious to hear it from his own voice, without giving herself away. Besides, she would like to do something to prevent Caleb from becoming a villain. The boy's face suddenly grew sad, but he still started talking. The girl confirmed that he had an older brother, about whom she had read a lot in the original work. At the age of 10, Cedric was adopted by the Ingenia family and perfected gravity magic at 13. He became the strongest in this creation and revived magic that had disappeared over 100 years ago. And although they are not blood brothers, Caleb came to love Cedric very much. At that moment, the boy's face became more serious than ever, and he confessed that last year his brother was cursed. And they say that only the sorcerer can lift the curse, who, unfortunately, they still haven't managed to find. This fairy and Elia's curse. What the hell is that? This is probably why Caleb is turning into the face of darkness. The original novel talks about Daphne, the protector of the Merinist family, and Prince Reno of the Epicenter Empire. And one day, a fairy appeared before Reno, determined to put him into eternal sleep. That fairy began to cast a spell on the prince to sleep forever. At that moment, Daphne appears in front of Reno and reflects the curse with magic. And then, when she protected him from the evil fairy, Daphne and Reno fell madly in love. Now, when Caleb spoke of his brother's curse, he declared that there is a way to lift it. The Sanctuary of Knowledge. Only authorized people can enter this place. The pillars of the empire, the Malashad, Marinist, and Indigentia families. Furthermore, only clan heads or heirs can enter after swearing allegiance to the family. The fastest way for Cedric to enter the Sanctuary of Knowledge is to become the Grand Duke. But he doesn't want to inherit the throne and wishes for Caleb to become the Grand Duke. The boy does not refuse to do it for his brother, but he is worried about not having the ability to lift the curse. However, he promised to do everything possible to enter the Sanctuary of Knowledge. Elia remembered that when Caleb becomes Grand Duke, Cedric's health will drastically worsen. That boy will manage to enter that sanctuary very quickly, and there, he will remove all the information he can find. But he will find nothing about the fairy or the curse. And one fine day, they will inform him that the fairy has been captured alive by the imperial court. And Caleb will run to the prison where she is held. He remembered that she was the only one who could break his brother's curse, but he didn't manage to speak to her. When he arrived at the place, the fairy had died mysteriously. After this, Caleb will decide that there is a conspiracy within the imperial family. He will stop trusting them, and, deeply hurt by his brother's illness, he will want to destroy them. Caleb will resort to forbidden black magic and make a pact with a great demon. When that happens, it will be impossible to stop this man. Elia sadly recalled this whole story that is about to happen. However, now in front of her, there is only a boy who strongly resembles her brother. And the young woman decided that, as long as Caleb is in that cottage, she will do everything possible to change the future. Hugging the boy, Elia assured him that he will manage to become a great duke and save his brother. And also, she promised to help him in everything within her power. That night she fell asleep next to him, hugging him like a caring older sister. She believed everything would be fine, and during the following week, she strived to keep their hope alive. Afterwards, one day they went for a walk in the forest, where they wove crowns and played like normal children. Now, looking at his face, the girl could say that Caleb had changed. The boy laughed often and enjoyed every minute of fun. His cruelty had disappeared. He smiled more frequently and expressed his emotions naturally. This is how a normal child should look. Then, Caleb caught a rabbit and brought it to Aaliyah, asking what they should do with it now. It was the same little rabbit that, a week earlier, hadn't allowed itself to be caught by Aaliyah. But she was happy to see it again. But upon seeing its face, the creature became nervous. It slipped away and fled again. The girl didn't understand why it fled only from her, as if her face had something terrifying for rabbits. But Caleb explained to her that the beast was only frightened because she approached abruptly. Then, she proposed returning to the cottage to eat something and held out her hand to the boy. He gladly extended his to her, and Elia noticed that his wounds had almost healed. He has been with her for several days now and will soon have to return to the duchy. Both to me and Elia, it seems strange that, after so much time, Caleb hadn't been looked for by his brother or anyone. Meanwhile, Cedric was standing by his bedroom window late at night, thinking where his brother might be. In reality, he was indeed looking for his brother and had put all his efforts into the search. Suddenly winter arrived, and the entire duchy was covered in fluffy snow. Cedric received a letter from the imperial family, warning him to stop using weather magic. His advisor, Edwin Polinoa, also informed him that the gates are covered in snow, and the vassals cannot leave. And if this continues, the castle and farmlands will suffer enormously. The Duke declared that everything is under control, and that he needs to clarify a few things. Therefore, if Edwin wants to stop the storm, he must find Caleb. Basically, he pushed all the responsibility onto the servant. It seemed strange to Cedric that in a whole week they had no clue and didn't know if his brother was alive. And it enraged him that the vassals were only concerned about the weather, as if it were more important than the life of the young duke. He ordered that Caleb be brought to him as soon as possible, and he doesn't care how they search for him, even if all the vassals freeze to the last one. With his head bowed, the advisor promised to carry out the order. Only Cedric grumbled. His vassals complained about the cold, while his brother was missing. The weight was unbearable. He prayed for his safe return. Every second was torture. He resorted to the Empire's information guilds, but not a trace of him. Desperation grew. Only one option remained. A guild he didn't want to go to. The Dark Guild, the last resort. Meanwhile, Caleb spent time with Elia, an oasis of calm in the storm. As they prepared for bed, she asked him to come closer to change his dressing. A tender gesture. It was crucial to do it often to avoid complications and speed up healing. Hope was reborn. Delicately, Elia placed the new dressing, noticing that the wound was healing quickly. A miracle. In a few more days, Elia trusted that the boy would recover completely. The light at the end of the tunnel. Caleb looked at the dressing on his fingers and, strangely, became sad. What did that shadow mean? His face reflected a deep sadness, as if he had lost something of great value. It's because he didn't want to return to the duchy so soon. But Elia didn't want that either. She only wanted his hand to heal quickly. Then they prepared for bed. Suddenly, the boy addressed the owner of the house. He wanted to tell her something important, but instantly changed his mind and asked her not to worry. However, the girl sensed his thoughts, having observed him this whole time. And when they lay down, Caleb thought that soon he would be able to use magic and return to the duchy. He understood that it was the right thing to do and that it had to be that way. And although he didn't want to, he had to return to his brother. Caleb remembered when he told Cedric that if he became Archduke, he could prove his loyalty and enter the Temple of Knowledge. The boy didn't understand why his brother was giving up the title, but he didn't want it. And he wished for his little brother to lead the family. For that, the little one would need time, and he wanted to break Cedric's curse right now. But the latter asked him not to worry, as there was another way, and it was not necessary to go to the Temple of Knowledge. Later, Caleb overheard the maids whispering that Lord Cedric was getting married. It was strange news to everyone, as if that would save his life. But even the maids believed that only the Temple of Knowledge could save the young lord. And now Cedric was renouncing the title, and could only prove his loyalty to the family through marriage. However, finding him a wife would be very difficult, because various rumors were circulating. They say the curse is contagious, and this news greatly frightened Caleb. I don't know who spread those rumors, but it's clear that no one will want to marry Cedric. Caleb didn't understand why his brother hadn't told him anything, as if he didn't want to involve him, or didn't trust him. He wished Cedric would tell him the truth and not hide anything from him. Then his thoughts returned to Elia, and he imagined her becoming his brother's partner. Viewed from the outside, they would really look magnificent together. Above all, that girl was very kind and had many talents. She would be perfect for Cedric. Now the boy harbored the hope that Elia could help his brother if they got married. Then he will prove his loyalty. He will enter the Temple of Knowledge and find a way to break the curse. After that, they can all live together, and Caleb will never feel alone again. But then the boy realized that he couldn't think of such a thing, because that showed him as a real selfish person, and he feared being left alone forever. He didn't want to cause problems for that girl, and promised to return as soon as her hand healed. With those thoughts, he fell asleep, but dreamed all night that he, Cedric, and Elia lived as a family. The next day, Elia asked what the guest wanted for lunch, promising to prepare something delicious. However, Caleb's mood was very gloomy, and he didn't care about anything. Noticing his sadness, the girl became frightened, not knowing what could have afflicted the little one so much. But then she realized that he had been behaving like that since the morning, and she hadn't paid attention to him. Elia didn't know what to do, but she wasn't planning to give up either. And she announced to Caleb that for lunch she was going to prepare potato soup with spices. And besides, for that she needed some lemons, and she asked the boy to pick them. With the same defeated face, Caleb agreed to fulfill the request, and he already noticed that his steps were so heavy and uncertain, as if he were going to fall. A walk in the open air should improve his mood, and the girl planned to go out with him later. But then something unexpected happened. Just as Caleb reached the door, a hooded man entered. The girl got scared for the boy, because that guy looked quite sinister, and he also started reaching out his hand towards him, saying that he had finally found him. But there was Elia. She was no fool and hit the intruder on the head with a frying pan. She didn't like the way that guy looked at Caleb, and that he entered her house without permission. The man looked very suspicious, and Elia decided that he had come to kidnap the boy. Raising the frying pan again to scare away the stranger, she heard him call Caleb brother. The boy approached and asked if he was okay. That's obvious. A blow to the head with a frying pan is no joke. Not just anyone stays standing. Elia was in shock. She had just hit someone with kitchen utensils. The blow was strong. Cedric tried to stay standing, but lost consciousness. Elia felt bad. She didn't know who was under the hood. She laid the Duke down until he recovered. Caleb saw Elia's fear and told her it wasn't her fault. Anyone would have done the same. The boy promised to explain everything to his brother when he woke up. Caleb didn't expect his brother to find him so quickly. The situation was awkward. And to think better, the boy went to get a damp towel. The girl stayed taking care of the injured man. It seemed to her that Caleb muttered something before going to the kitchen. At that instant, a faint moan reached her ears. Cedric was beginning to react, and Elia decided to look for the cold cloth, leaving Caleb to look after his brother. But she noticed that the Duke remained unconscious, as if he only spoke in dreams. Elia noticed his tight collar and decided to unbutton it to ease his breathing. As soon as she touched the buttons, Cedric instantly grabbed her hand. Opening his eyes, the young master demanded an explanation of what she intended to do. Due to surprise and fright, Elia was paralyzed, not knowing what words to use, and Cedric thought she was a pervert taking advantage of his condition. This left the girl in shock when she only wanted to help. The young master insisted on his interrogation, asking about her intentions, and sounded very serious. Then, bluntly, she snapped at him why he had kidnapped Caleb. Surprise and nervousness, once again, froze the words in the girl's throat. He was accusing her without proof. Moreover, he thought she had created a barrier, so he couldn't find the place. Elia found her voice and shouted that the master had misunderstood everything. Immediately after, she turned to quickly summon Caleb. But suddenly, something pulled her to the ground like a powerful magnet. She couldn't move a finger. Cedric, believing she was trying to escape, used gravity magic and pinned her to the floor. And although the girl swore she wouldn't run away, her words didn't seem to convince him. The atmosphere was becoming very tense, and Elia understood that Master Cedric didn't intend to let her go easily. But right there smack, Caleb slammed a towel into his face, demanding that he leave Elia alone. And he also ordered him to cancel the spell immediately and release the girl. For Cedric to obey instantly, the boy explained that she had saved his life. Then Cedric found out that a wolf had almost eaten his brother, but Elia intervened and defeated it. Now the boy is disappointed in his brother because he wanted to finish off his savior. At that moment, Cedric's face was a picture of pure shock. Then he asked why Caleb hadn't used magic to return to the duchy. It turns out the boy cast the barrier, and Elia was stunned to see him using magic. She didn't understand how he could do that, when until yesterday, he had wounds on his hand. But Caleb confessed that he used magic because he wanted to spend a little more time with Elia. Then, he apologized to the girl for having to deceive her. Although he had a wound, he could use magic, and he had to trick her so as not to return so soon. The girl was a little shocked, but she understood the boy's desire and wasn't angry. Hugging him, Elia explained that there was nothing wrong with his motive, and he shouldn't apologize. This moved Caleb so much that he burst into tears, which was a bit surprising, since in the original story, he never shed a tear. Elia also didn't feel like parting with the boy with whom she was having such a good time. And when she admitted it, Caleb suggested they go with them to the duchy. It was unexpected for her, but Stranger was hearing that he would marry Cedric. They decided to discuss it later and suggested Caleb sleep a little, and he fell asleep very quickly. Elia was shaken by what had happened, but decided to offer something else to her other guest. And when she went to the kitchen to prepare something, Cedric unexpectedly came out to meet her. Moreover, he had taken off his wet shirt and intended to sit at the table like that. His appearance greatly disturbed the girl. She didn't understand why it was necessary to do that. However, she served him hot tea while preparing the food. The Duke thanked her, and while drinking the tea, Elia was surprised admiring his perfect figure, and immediately decided to look away, realizing it was inappropriate to look at him like that. However, she couldn't stop thinking that the Duke looked much better than those types trained in kimono. While Elia was lost in thought, Cedric got up and apologized for bursting into her house like that. Furthermore, he understood that she had hit him with the frying pan to protect Caleb. The girl wanted to continue talking, but she gave him a blanket to cover himself and not feel uncomfortable. She was curious to know who that man was. In the original story, they didn't give him much time. He had a cold look, but at the same time, Cedric seemed like a good person. Then he remembered Caleb's request and asked why the boy had talked about marriage. Cedric honestly admitted that it was probably because of the curse. Caleb believes that the report for the cure might be in the Temple of Knowledge. But to enter, one must be the head of the family. Furthermore, a ceremony must be held in which loyalty must be sworn. And only blood relatives can perform that ceremony. And Cedric has different blood. However, if he is married, he will have the right to perform the ceremony. Now Elia understood why Caleb had asked her that. And the Duke suddenly confessed that he had never seen his brother like that, trusting someone so much. To top it all off, he left Ilya speechless by revealing that no one wants to marry him, because of rumors that the curse is contagious. Although, of course, they are just rumors, and someone made sure to spread them. So that the girl would stop worrying, Cedric promised to return to the duchy immediately with his brother. As soon as he woke up, Ilya remembered that Caleb wanted to stay with her a little longer, and asked why they insisted on making him Archduke. Cedric had been honest with her so far, and he hoped she would give him a sincere answer. And he admitted that, for unknown reasons, Caleb was kidnapped right after birth. His parents searched for him for 4 years, until they found out he was in an orphanage. At that moment, Ilya remembered that the original story mentioned the murder of the Indigentia family. On the way from the orphanage, someone attacked them, and everyone in the carriage was murdered. Only Caleb survived, and for everyone it was a terrible tragedy. Since then, some vassals hated the young duke and spread rumors. Since Cedric cannot inherit the title due to his blood, Caleb must be Archduke to protect himself. The brother did not want Caleb to always depend on someone. His curse was secondary. Ilya now understands why Cedric tries so hard for his younger brother to survive. But in that case, the boy will not be able to live as he wishes. And the young woman understood that she couldn't help him with anything, except listening to him. However, if Cedric marries her and enters the Temple of Knowledge, he will not find a way to lift the curse. And all that remains is to find the fairy who imposed that illness on him. Cedric noticed the worry on the face of the cottage owner, and she only mentally scolded herself for not having thought of that before. She read the novel and knows that when Caleb became Archduke, the protagonist was kidnapped by the fairy, and Ilya decided to find her before the imperial family. Besides, it's not clear what exactly she died of. The girl planned to find out who that fairy is, especially since at the end of the novel she saw her face and her name. The problem is that her memory was betraying her a little, and she couldn't remember that episode. In any case, Ilya decided to cheer up Cedric, telling him that she knew another way to lift the curse. Besides, they won't necessarily have to get married, and she can change the course of history. The young woman focused again on what that fairy's face looked like, and when memories began to surface, Ilya went into a deep shock, and even Cedric had trouble getting her to react. She remembered that there was talk of silver hair that turned pink, and the fairy's eyes were like 2 precious gems. Ilya was in shock upon discovering that she herself cursed Cedric, while the Duke tried to bring her back from the shock. And bring her back. Her brain was still working, and she understood that she could lift the curse. Afterwards, when Caleb woke up, they told him that Ilya had agreed to marry Cedric. The girl tried to show happiness about going to the duchy together. Cedric also confirmed it, although he looked somewhat nervous. Yesterday, Ilya proposed marriage to him to break his curse. The young master was visibly surprised, but happy at the same time. But first, Ilya wanted to clarify the situation a bit. If she in the past created this problem, she must be able to solve it. She longed with all her being to see those two living happily ever after. But now it's impossible, because she remembers absolutely nothing about the original Ilya. She only knows her name and age, and on top of that, she has no idea about magic. And now, despair invades her. She fears being completely unable to do anything. At least Caleb didn't recognize her, because before she always wore a black hood. The story has changed, but she wants to flee. She fears the boy will find out who she is, and then he will unleash his fury on her for playing with them and not breaking the curse. The thought that she will have to die if that happens terrifies her completely. But there is another problem. When they locked up the fairy, she died mysteriously. The cause could have been a chronic illness, or perhaps an old vassal killed her. In any case, it doesn't matter now if Ilya flees or not, death awaits her anyway. And for now, the only way to survive is to marry Cedric and observe how events unfold. Ilya hoped that over time she would understand how to break the curse, and then she could leave far away. She will be able to live her own life, and Cedric and Caleb will be happy. At first, Ilya didn't want to get involved, but since it turned out she was a fairy, she is obligated to help them. For her, it no longer matters that she is in the world of a novel. These people have become real. Later, Cedric explained to his younger brother that he would marry Ilya, but it would be an unusual marriage. They have entered into a contract marriage, and it will last until the curse is broken, and then the girl will freely return to her home. Surprisingly, Caleb did not complain, understanding that it had to be this way. Ilya and Cedric decided to tell the boy everything immediately, so that he wouldn't feel sad later. He pretended to understand everything, but then declared that Elia did not have to return to that cottage, because Cedric's divorce does not mean she has to leave the duchy, and she will be able to live with Caleb. Furthermore, the girl will need an official status, and the boy promised to be her guardian. The news that she could continue living in the castle was pleasant, but shocking for Elia. But this meant that something had changed in Caleb himself, and not for the worse. Then, Cedric explained that what he was proposing would be difficult to do, because in the first place, one must take Elia's wishes into account. And there the boy declared that this lady likes being with him, as she herself had told him. At that moment, he remembered that Elia never spoke about her wishes. The two brothers stared at her, waiting for an answer, but she froze up. Feeling uncomfortable, Cedric proposed changing the subject to start. Furthermore, they needed to discuss the terms of the contract. Elia thought this situation was the best thing that could happen to Cedric, and Caleb was happy that this girl would stay by his side a little longer. Elia felt sorry for that boy. He had to mature too soon. Besides, she loved spending time with him. He looked a lot like Junji. Elia hoped to recover her memories, break the curse, and prevent Caleb from plunging the world into chaos. But she understood that everything was her fault, because she was Elia, although everything happened before she was reborn. And she won't be able to confess to Caleb that this joy is fake. So she decides to quickly get rid of these feelings. But right now, she needs to focus on solving the problem. And soon they arrived at the castle, whose gloomy appearance was hard to hide even with the white snow. That snow disappeared in an instant, as Cedric canceled the spell. And after Elia took a look, this place seemed simply magnificent to her. The girl was delighted, even more so because she knew nothing about this place. And she even wondered if she would be able to fulfill the task assigned. Later, Cedric explained that she had to meet the vassals, and that scared her a little. But since Caleb returned to the palace, the Duke must report it, and also announce his future marriage. For today, the girl has nothing else to do, and can rest in the room to which the maid will accompany her. At that instant, his chief advisor approached the young master and whispered something to him. Immediately after, Cedric was about to leave for the meeting, asking Elia to notify him if she needed anything. But just then, Caleb stopped him and declared that he also wanted to participate in the meeting. This was somewhat unexpected, both for Cedric and Elia. Originally, this boy never participated in meetings, until his brother fell into a deep sleep. But now Caleb understood that in the forest, he could be a normal boy, but not here. Elia saved him then and took care of him. She even had to agree to his request. Therefore, she wants to guarantee his safety, while she remains in the duchy. The young woman was slightly shocked. She didn't know what to say to that. Cedric, for his part, noticed that this lady had given his brother confidence in just a few days. He agreed to take Caleb with him, and the latter promised Elia that he would return very soon. When left alone, the young woman worried that the boy would be all right. She would have liked to accompany him, but she trusted that nothing bad would happen because Cedric would be there. A minute later, a girl with dark pink hair named Olivia entered who would serve Elia. She seemed like a kind girl and aroused no suspicion of any kind, and Elia was silently glad to have her own maid. From Olivia, she learned that the meeting with the vassals had already begun, and she worried again about how Caleb would feel. After all, although he has a title, he is still a child. In the meeting, a marquis, Reynold Babylon, was upset that a mere girl would become the wife of the head of the family. But Cedric asked him to be careful with his words and not call her that in the presence of the future archduke. Furthermore, he added that he loves that girl, so be careful what you say. The marquis could not reply. He just gnashed his teeth in rage. Cedric came to deliver news, not to hear complaints, and he plans to marry soon. The ministers remembered that when Caleb disappeared, the young man froze the palace. So it's better not to provoke him, but they planned to get rid of that interloper. And Marquis Babylon was boiling. If Cedric gets married, his plan will go down the drain. Babylon, brother of the previous Archduchess Idizel, is like an uncle to Cedric. And Caleb, after the family's murder, he failed to become second in command. But when they cursed Cedric, the Marquis hid a new plan, spreading rumors to prevent the wedding. People fear that the curse is contagious and are slowly moving away from Cedric. Then the Marquis planned to get rid of Caleb by using Gerald, his teacher, as a tool. After that, Cedric would become Duke. And to break the curse, he would have to marry Gerald. In that case, Marquis Babylon would have absolute power. But the appearance of that girl changed everything. Reynolds feared that Cedric would end up in the Temple of Knowledge, and discover something about Caleb's past. And just then, Cedric announced that his fiancée would take etiquette classes with Caleb. That angered the Marquis even more. His daughter didn't go to the academy to educate a commoner. Caleb fell upon Babylon, demanding that she not be called that, and his face twisted in anger. Reynolds got scared. He had never seen the boy like that. Moreover, he exuded a strong pressure when he remembered that this lady was the future Indigenous Duchess. From the boy's reaction, it was clear to everyone that this girl was very important to him. Babylon understood that he couldn't do anything now, but he decided to turn the problem into an opportunity. And first, he thought about how to kick this lady out of the duchy. Meanwhile, Elia was in shock. The bed was so soft that she had never slept like that in her past life. The next morning, she noticed that she had no swelling, although she went to bed quite late. It turns out that the night before she received an expensive skin treatment, and now her eyes really looked like gems. And that made her very happy. Then a maid appeared and informed her that breakfast was ready. Olivia brought a whole table to the room with many varied delicacies. Elia couldn't believe she could eat all that luxurious food without problems. Olivia asked to be notified when the lady finished breakfast, as Lord Cedric was waiting for her. The maid insisted on helping Elia with her outfit, but she assured him she could do it alone. Olivia retorted, "The young lady will meet her fiancé and must look absolutely perfect." Cedric was engrossed in documents in his office when the arrival of Miss Elia was announced to him. Without looking up, he apologized for making her come so early, but she reassured him, saying she was in excellent spirits after sweet dreams in such a soft bed. Cedric was glad she liked the room and asked her to wait a little while he finished the paperwork. But then he looked up and saw that the young woman had transformed. Now he had a dazzling beauty before him, and her sweet smile only increased her charm. Cedric realized he was falling in love with her, but decided not to show it. And in a calm tone, he asked her again to wait a moment. Elia also noticed that the boy froze when he saw her, and that pleased her very much. While she waited, Cedric's head assistant, Edwin Polinoa, approached and greeted her. The girl remembered seeing him yesterday and was now glad for this formal meeting. Edwin proceeded to explain the reason why they had called her suddenly, but Cedric interrupted him, stating that he would tell everything himself, and Edwin decided to leave immediately. Meanwhile, he turned red as a tomato. It seemed even amusing to Elia. Then, the Duke snapped his fingers, and a transparent dome formed around them. He explained to Elia that it was so that no one could overhear their conversation. Then he asked if Elia remembered anything, but the girl didn't understand what he was referring to. But then she remembered telling him that she had lost her memory and claimed that it hadn't improved yet. She had no other choice, but she really doesn't remember anything about her character. However, they decided to hide her amnesia from the castle inhabitants. And fortunately, Caleb believed her immediately. Elia just didn't know what Cedric thought about it. Then, the Duke extended a contract to her, explaining that they needed to align their ideas to set the wedding date as soon as possible. The contract is for 3 years, and if the curse is not lifted during that time, it will be extended. Elia is also assigned a salary every month. Cedric only asked her to record all expenses, and when he asked her to let him know if it was too little, the girl was surprised, considering how many zeros there were. Calculating that, converted to wands, she would receive 3 billion per month. Elia even screamed in surprise. But because of this, Cedric only thought that the amount was insufficient. For Elia, it was another shock. In her past life, with that money she could buy a decent house. She didn't understand why Cedric was so generous. The contract was written for her benefit, but he decided that it was the price for her silence. And he was not mistaken. Furthermore, Cedric explained that she would receive that sum as compensation for her limited freedom. Then he asked her to review another point. She must not leave the duchy without company. In other words, if she wanted to go out, she could only do so accompanied by Cedric or Caleb. Furthermore, they would form a chivalric order for her protection, and her servants would be from his circle. They would be the Duke's eyes and ears. And this began to frighten her. She understood that, as long as she was in the duchy, Cedric would watch her every move. They remained silent for a moment. The Duke gave her time to think everything over, and she tried to snap out of the shock, realizing that she would be like a prisoner there. On the other hand, she has nothing to lose. Besides, she will live in luxury and accepted the conditions. The young master expected a different reaction and didn't think she would accept so quickly. But Elia explained that she understands his fears, as she cannot say anything about herself. And for her, it is normal that he suspects her a little, especially since in her past life, the girl was used to constant control. Then, Elia finished reading the rest of the contract and declared that nothing needed to be changed. Even so, Cedric asked her to let him know if she suddenly wanted to add anything. But it seemed to the girl that everything was written so perfectly that she had nothing to add. She understood that when the curse was broken, she would receive compensation. She would buy a house and live there in solitude. But then she remembered how well she got along with Caleb and asked for one more point to be added to the contract. Elia wished to have the right to visit the duchy after the divorce to see Caleb. Such a request seemed a bit strange to Cedric, and the girl explained that when she is with him, her memories gradually return. Furthermore, he looks a lot like a person who is very important to her. After thinking about it for a bit, the young duke accepted this condition, even more so knowing that his brother also loves this girl. But first, he decided to know Caleb's opinion, so that he would not be against adding that point. Elia was so happy, as if her dearest wish had come true. After that, she left Cedric's office, and already outside the door, as if returning to reality. She only wanted to live peacefully in solitude, and she didn't understand why she had acted like that. Olivia noticed her looking a bit distressed. She even worried that something might happen to the young lady, because she was hunched over and clearly nervous. Elia reassured her by saying that everything was fine, that she just hadn't gotten used to the new place. At the same time, she was glad that at least sometimes she could see Caleb again. Meanwhile, Cedric tried to understand why Elia had accepted the restriction of her freedom so quickly. At that moment, his assistant reappeared. Enthusiastic about the beauty of Miss Elia, Edwin confessed that he had never seen such mysterious eyes before. They say that only a small portion of fairies are born with eyes resembling precious stones. However, Cedric was not sure if Elia was a pure-blooded fairy, and he thought she was mixed race. Edwin would believe the fairy lady was pure-blooded if they called her that, as she not only has beautiful eyes, she has long, beautiful hair and a melodious voice. But noticing Mr. Edwin's disapproving look, he fell silent, understanding that he values Elia, since she can help break the curse, and Cedric hates when what belongs to him is touched. Now the advisor will have to be more careful, as he values his life. However, Cedric understood that his servant was right, and this girl stood out, even when she lived in the cottage. And if you think about it, she really looks like a purebred fairy. The Duke does not know Elia's personality, but he feels that she is an emotional person and kind. Moreover, she is very different from him. Cedric still couldn't forget how she screamed in surprise, and then she rejoiced like a little girl, accepting all the contract conditions. Suddenly, the Duke realized that he was thinking about this girl more than he should. And just then, the advisor's voice, like a demon in his ear, whispered that Cedric had just smiled. Edwin was truly surprised that his lord smiled. It had been so long since he saw that smile, and to keep his assistant busy, he asked him to take care of the remaining documents. Thus Cedric punished his chatter, while he went to have lunch with Caleb. On the way, the young duke thought that the contract was already signed, and now he had to prepare for the wedding. But then his thoughts returned to Elia. He was intrigued by what floral scent emanated from her, although it could be an illusion, as he had lost his sense of smell due to the curse. Therefore, he simply couldn't perceive that scent. Upon meeting Caleb, Cedric told him that Elia wished to see him from time to time. After the curse was broken and they divorced, the boy couldn't believe that this girl wanted to hang out with him, and he understood that before it was hard for him to respond. But Caleb wasn't satisfied with that, and he decided to devise a way to keep Elia in the duchy. Even after the divorce, now he only accepted such a wish, believing that later he would undoubtedly invent something. Then Cedric asked to discuss together what they would do after the contract ended. Furthermore, he declared that tomorrow Caleb would have to return to etiquette lessons, and Elia would go with him. The lessons themselves didn't inspire the boy, but Elia's presence cheered him up, and he promised to try hard. His reaction seemed a bit strange to Cedric. For some reason, Caleb seemed unhappy. He thought the boy would be happy, since Elia would go with him. But what made him happiest was this girl's request. Cedric wished for his brother to share with him everything he felt. Meanwhile, Elia went for a walk in the garden, which she liked very much. And the weather was excellent. She would love to walk here with Caleb, especially since he had promised her a tour of the entire duchy before. At first, Elia thought she didn't fit in, but now she was happy. Everyone seemed kind. She was also curious about what the vassals were like and hoped they wouldn't point out her marriage. The problem of recovering the memories of the real Ilya remained and had to be solved as soon as possible. Suddenly, the girl heard the maids discussing something animatedly. It turned out that the maids hadn't seen Cedric and Caleb having such a friendly lunch together in a long time. Ilya thought about leaving, but she overheard that the brothers still felt awkward around each other. The relationship between them was good, but for some reason, there was always an uncomfortable atmosphere. It seemed strange to Ilya to hear talk of such a relationship between brothers. In the original story, they were very good friends, but now, for some strange reason, the girl was taking it seriously. A little earlier, when Ilya was about to have lunch, she knew that Cedric and Caleb were already eating. Olivia asked why the lady was eating alone and not with the Lord. She modestly explained that she didn't want to disturb the brothers, as she knew they often ate together. Therefore, she didn't want to interrupt their conversation. But this surprised the maid. And now Ilya understood that there was a problem she knew nothing about. Later, walking in the garden and lost in thought, the girl heard Caleb's voice. They had agreed to meet earlier, and now the boy was rushing towards her. At the same time, he understood that it was difficult for her to be alone here, as she still hadn't gotten used to the place. Ilya assured him that everything was fine. Then she asked how lunch with Cedric went. The boy's answer overflowed with joy, as if everything had gone perfectly. And that cheered up the girl. Now they could walk peacefully with the little one. Caleb himself was impatient to show everything to Ilya as soon as possible. They stopped on a stone bridge to admire the scenery, and Ilya was fascinated. Then she spotted on the shore a flower similar to the stream they saw in the forest. The girl agilely put Caleb on her back and prepared to run there to see it up close. Later, they sat on a bench next to the fountain to rest a little. They had a great time today, and Caleb confessed that he was very happy when Ilya was with him. Then, he remembered that together they had to attend etiquette classes, and the boy feared that Ilya would be disappointed to see his more immature side. The girl understood that he wanted to appear worthy before her, but if he is only a child, and he also promised that he wouldn't disappoint her and would try his best in class. Even so, Ilya didn't quite understand what he meant and asked him to explain more. According to the boy, people don't like those for whom nothing goes well. This outraged Ilya, and she asked him not to listen to those stupid prejudices. However, Caleb remained worried that Ilya wouldn't like him anymore if he didn't try hard. Now the girl thought someone had told him on purpose, mentioning his name, and little Caleb believed it as if it had to be so. The girl suspected that the teacher she met this morning had told him that. Noticing the worry on her face, the boy immediately thought she had got angry. Then, he remembered the red spots on his hands and now guessed how they appeared. Also, that they force him to eat less to look good at events. Realizing that the culprit was probably that teacher, Ilya asked Caleb to listen to her carefully. But first, she asked him to show her his palms one more time. And upon seeing those scars again, she begged him to honestly admit if the teacher hit him with rods. The girl noticed those scars the first day they met, and now she understands why he wears gloves. Caleb immediately started justifying himself, saying that they punish him for not being good enough in his studies. And he covered the wounds so that people wouldn't see them and be disappointed in him, while justifying the teacher. Ilya's realized that Caleb fully believes his teacher, who doesn't even consider him a person. And the way that teacher educates the boy, in Ilya's opinion, is simple brainwashing. She remembered from the book that Gerald Babylon was Caleb's teacher, the daughter of Marquis Babylon, who tried to marry her off to Cedric, but her plan failed. In the original story, the young duke rejected the marriage, and the Marquis's intentions to marry off his daughter, when the curse worsened, were evident. Then, Ilya asked if Caleb had spoken to his brother about the etiquette lessons. As she suspected, the boy said nothing, fearing disappointing his brother. Furthermore, the teacher insisted that it was better for Cedric not to see the marks of the blows. Supposedly, Caleb only distracted his older brother with that. The teacher also said that Caleb annoyed Cedric during dinner, and that the latter was forced to talk to him. That is why the boy wants to learn even more and try his best. Caleb believed that his teacher saw his shortcomings better, and that terrified Ilya. The boy was simply scared. But now, he understood that this was the reason for the strange relationship between the brothers. Marquis Reynold, meanwhile, was using his vassals to corner the young duke. And Giriel manipulated him, pretending to care, and Caleb believed every word she said. But if the brothers reconcile, their plans will be thwarted. Giriel convinced Caleb that his brother hates him. Therefore, the boy began to keep his distance from Cedric. And Cedric himself probably thinks that his younger brother hates him and doesn't want to talk to him. The girl wished the brothers were more open with each other. She remembered his face when he realized that Caleb trusted her a lot. And that man, despite knowing the fastest way to get rid of the curse, is willing to give it up for his brother. In the original story, Cedric said before dying that he would accept it if Caleb was indifferent to him. But because of Gerald and Renault, Caleb couldn't think clearly. Elia wanted to fix the situation somehow, and, sitting next to the boy, took his hands and asked him why he was behaving like that. She also blamed herself for not immediately noticing that his scars didn't look like common scratches. Then she explained that this method of educating children was unacceptable and that he should not accept it. They shouldn't punish him, and he shouldn't think it's his fault for not knowing something. Caleb listened carefully to Elia, but still didn't understand why she was saying that. And she continued, saying that not everything the teacher says is true. And she begged the boy not to fill his head with nonsense that woman made up. Being chosen after the interview in the duchy doesn't give her the right to hit the boy. Elia asked what Caleb felt when the teacher said everything was for his future. The boy only thought that he wasn't trying hard enough. But Elia wanted to know what emotions overwhelmed him when hearing those words from the teacher. The boy remembered how he looked at his palms full of scars and confessed that he felt sad. He also wanted to know if what they told him was true, but he had no one to ask. He wanted to get closer to Cedric, but feared that he would hate him even more. And these thoughts never left Caleb's mind. The boy just wanted not to be hated and believed he had no other choice. Now he doesn't know what to do or what to believe. Elia listened to Caleb and looked at his face, while her heart clenched over the mistreatment of the little one. And now he confessed that he only wanted to believe Elia. And upon saying it, he was about to cry. The girl stroked his hair and begged him to believe more in himself. If he did, everything would turn out well for him, and he would have nothing to fear. Her words acted like a spell on the boy, and he could no longer hold back his tears. They sat in the garden until Caleb calmed down. Then she took him to her room. On the way to her quarters, Elia felt immense fury towards the Marquis and his daughter. She wanted to destroy them. She even imagined bursting in like a savage and showing those bastards what was good. The girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that it took her a moment to hear Cedric calling her. He was simply curious to know why they were walking so late with Caleb and what she thought of the castle. Surprise left Elia speechless for a moment, but she remembered Caleb's request not to tell his brother anything. He wanted to do it, only he was still afraid. And the girl only explained that they had a lot of fun. That's why they got carried away, and only recently did she put him to bed. Then she noticed that the young master was looking at her strangely, and immediately apologized for taking up so much of his younger brother's time, while thinking that Cedric himself should pay more attention to the child. Also, now she had to prepare for tomorrow's etiquette lesson. And the first thing is to separate Juril and Renault, and even try to fire that teacher. If Babylon's vassal's daughter is dismissed, this will cause criticism and hinder his plan. But it is the fastest way to free Caleb from brainwashing. Elia was ready to act like never before. It hurt her deeply that they mistreated the child. And before leaving this duchy, she would make sure that Gerald would never appear here again. The next morning, Elia went to class after Olivia helped her get ready. On the way, the girl hoped that everything would turn out in the best possible way. Thoughts about this kept her up late, but she still didn't know how to get rid of Gerald. For now, Elia only saw one way to dismiss the miserable one without revealing the situation with Caleb. And her plan was called using Cedric. Elia hoped to find some flaw in the first class to then complain to the Lord. In the end, Cedric would doubt Cheryl's competence and start looking for another teacher. This way, Elia could easily get rid of Cheryl. But for now it is the only plan, and if nothing works, Elia cannot figure out anything else. She even envied other novel heroines who solve problems on the fly. And here one had to act cunningly, since she couldn't just hit Gerald, even though she wanted to. Elia found this situation very difficult, but trusted that everything would turn out fine. When she approached the class, Caleb greeted her and asked if she liked breakfast. The girl nodded satisfactorily and noticed that he had slept well. Even so, she worried about him and hoped he wouldn't have to endure those mockeries anymore. Then, a servant announced to them that the daughter of Marquis Vivelin, Gerald, had arrived. Elia became alert, but was ready to meet that scoundrel face to face, and she asked to be let in. Gerald entered and greeted her students in the most appropriate manner. On her face, there wasn't a hint that she could harm the child. What Elia saw was very different from what she had imagined, and she immediately showered the future Duchess with compliments. She even noticed that she had a sweet voice. Then, Gerald began the lesson, and Elia had the task of trying to walk correctly. But first, the teacher asked her to walk around the room as she normally did. The girl was even disappointed. Gerald was really dedicated to teaching, as a teacher should be. What surprised her the most was when the Marquise praised her way of walking. Elia understood that with that pace, she wouldn't be able to carry out what she planned. But instantly, she understood that the teacher wasn't that kind by chance, and she surely had a plan. And seeing that smiling face, Elia felt even more like hitting her, but she restrained herself. But in the second and third lessons too, everything went wonderfully. Cheryl gave no reason to doubt her. Elia couldn't wait for her to show her true colors, to get rid of her once and for all. But suddenly, in one class, the Marquise became serious when, once again, she addressed the lady. Then she confessed that Elia wasn't learning from her mistakes and was absorbing everything too slowly. And she added that if the lady continued like this, the young lord would be disappointed in her. The girl didn't understand why Gerald was talking about Cedric. In reality, she had already started brainwashing him, and she kept insisting that Lady Elia should look worthy at the wedding. Then she promised she would achieve it without fail and asked her to fully trust her, since it was for her own good. And that's when Elia understood that this shrew was trying to manipulate her. This is the moment she had been waiting for. Now she can move to the next level of her plan. Yarel actually hated, and greatly so, the new student. When her father notified her that she had to instruct a commoner, she didn't hesitate to get angry. But the Marquis couldn't help it. It was an order from the Duke himself. Gerald's mother insisted that this would help her become Duchess soon. But she kept protesting, because although they obeyed the order, they didn't even consult her. And she almost cried. She didn't study at the academy to educate a simple peasant woman. Her father and mother kept consoling her, assuring her that the destitute family would soon be in her hands. She just had to be patient, and they asked her not to worry about Caleb, as they trusted her completely. And there would be no problems. They didn't understand how Elia had managed to win over that young man so quickly, but they believed she couldn't do anything, and that they would find a way to get rid of her, because the flaws of a commoner are always noticeable, even if she is promoted. Now Gerald must be the perfect daughter of the Marquis to be able to manipulate that girl. The Marquise agreed, although a little worried, noticing that it wouldn't be hard for her to do so. But she didn't foresee that Elia knew everything and had started her own game. Speaking of Elia's successes, she confessed that she had spoken with the Duke about her flaws. She was also worried about being just a commoner, and that people would judge the status difference. Furthermore, she confessed that after that, Cedric approached her in a field of flowers and told her something. He didn't care about her status or her abilities, and didn't care what others thought. Cedric asked Elia to keep being herself, because he loved her just the way she was. Elia kept repeating Cedric's love confession out loud. Seeing Cheryl's face, she added that status and power pale in comparison to love. But the teacher tried to smile, not understanding why the girl wasn't falling for her traps. She had done everything for that commoner to feel offended and leave. Elia, on the other hand, celebrated in her mind that Gerald was falling into her own trap, and now she was curious about what would happen. She was also glad that Caleb was absorbed in a book and heard nothing. With this, Elia supposed that the walking etiquette lesson could end. Meanwhile, she waited for the Marquise's reaction, maintaining a satisfied smile. Suddenly, Gerald declared that now they would move on to deeper study. The Marquise even smiled, but that smile had a sinister air. Immediately after, Yarel brought Elia some heels, explaining that she had to learn to walk in them. For the girl, this seemed like an infernal test, an absolute torment, but she understood that Yarel intended to show her that she was a complete failure. However, she feigned interest, trusting to take at least a few steps without breaking her neck. Elia, even before reincarnating, rarely wore heels, and when putting them on, she felt her knees tremble. When she took a few steps, Gerald asked her to walk even faster. She surely expected Elia to fall, but she trusted her chances. But then she felt something strange. Apparently, there was a hidden trap in all of this. And indeed, when taking the next step, the shoe's heel began to come off. Obviously, Elia lost her balance and fell, while Gerald pretended to be very worried about her. Now, the young woman understood the Marquise's plan. She surely broke the heel on purpose, but she could have fractured her leg. Elia wanted to explode. Her patience was at its limit, but the Marquise approached and began to lament. She couldn't believe the shoes broke. The maid prepared them, and Gerald couldn't believe she hadn't checked them. Then she promised to punish the maid, as it was her responsibility. Elia was about to protest. When Caleb ran to her, he saw the situation and got worried. Then he asked to suspend the lesson and take her to her room to treat the wound. Unexpectedly, even Gerald agreed to end the lesson. With deep sorrow on her face, she wished Lady Elia a good rest. But she knew those emotions were feigned. However, she believed she could overcome everything that Shrew had prepared for her and get her out of there. Although she could have dealt with her right now, she decided to act more cunningly. And her leg was tingling a little. Later, they brought a doctor to Elia. In reality, she had slightly injured her leg, but all the bones were intact, and she only suffered a small scratch. The doctor gave her an ointment so the skin would heal faster, and asked her to make sure the wound didn't get infected. Caleb remained worried about Elia being all right, and she assured him there was no reason to worry. The young woman noticed that Caleb seemed embarrassed, as if he wanted to tell her something, but he was afraid, and she asked him to sit next to her on the bed. Then he apologized to her, because he had another lesson and had to leave. The boy promised to return to her right after the classes ended and asked her to rest well. Upon leaving through the door, Caleb stopped for a moment, as if plotting something. What happened to Elia did not leave him in peace. He loved her and was very worried, and he hoped she would recover for the next class, because he didn't want to be left alone with the teacher again. Then Olivia went to see Elia, and confessed that she had worried a lot upon learning that the lady had fallen. But the maid was even more surprised to learn that Caleb tried to carry Elia. For today, Olivia asked Elia not to move and to call her if she needed anything. The young woman assured him she was fine, but was pleased to hear that everyone was worried about her. After promising the maid that she would rest, Elia rejoiced to herself that she had done well today. However, it infuriated her that that shrew of a marquise had made Caleb worry. The teacher turned out to be somewhat unpredictable, and Elia planned to tell Cedric what happened. Gerald Babylon came from a wealthy family, and all her wishes were always fulfilled. She got everything she wanted. However, she continued to crave more. And if we look at their actions, we can understand that all members of the Marquise family are the same. Suddenly, Elia got an idea, and she asked Olivia to invite her etiquette teacher. Gerald didn't delay, and as soon as she crossed the threshold, she began to lament the lady's injury. She tried to show sincere concern, and the truth is, she wasn't a bad actress. But Elia didn't want to talk about that, and asked the maid to leave them alone. Gerald sensed that something was wrong, but didn't let it show. And when they were alone, without erasing the smile on her face, she asked why they had called her, immediately declaring that she did not punish the maid, as Lady Elia asked. She even called the lady an angel for forgiving the maid's fault, but both knew the maid was innocent, and she hadn't damaged the shoes. Then Elia composed herself, and with a serious face, begged Gerald to stop the farce, and that there was no need to smile like that or act so friendly. Since it was just the two of them in the room, the Marquise agreed and finally relaxed the muscles in her face. Then she stated that she didn't know how Elia managed to get into the duchy, but pointed out that the influence of the Babylon family was enormous there, and Elia shouldn't think of herself as important, because here they considered her insignificant, since people like her get dizzy at the slightest hint of power. But Elia wanted to know something else. Why did Gerald act as if she didn't care about little Caleb at all? But she felt no guilt, because she is convinced that she does it for the future Archduke. And now it annoys her that Lady Elia appeared, without whom everything was going very well, and she came to break it all. Gerald didn't believe that Elia simply supports Caleb, since she has known him since he was a baby, and she doesn't understand why Elia thinks she knows this boy better than anyone. It is Gerald whom Caleb trusts the most, and she demanded that the lady accept that position. Elia did not deny that Caleb had spent relatively little time with her. Furthermore, his story was not described in detail in the novel, but right now she is getting to know the boy's life. And she blames herself for the carefree thoughts she had at the beginning. There was a lot of similar trash around this little man, and in such a situation, he only became Archduke. Elia understood that at some point she would have to leave the duchy, but for now she is by his side. And during this time, she was going to teach those bastards a lesson. Now in front of the Marquise, the girl decided to take the next step, smiling sweetly. She declared that Gerald looked simply horrible. She wanted that scoundrel to feel what her victims feel. At that moment, Gerald couldn't take it, and giving free rein to her emotions, her mouth twisted with anger. She called Elia a commoner without lineage, to which she put on a surprised face and asked if that speech was an etiquette lesson. The Marquise's reaction was what Aaliyah expected, as it is difficult to ignore an insulting commoner. The lady continued teaching the teacher that aristocrats must always watch their words and their behavior. Faced with this, Gerald nervously ground her teeth, and then, shouting, she lunged at the girl who dared to lecture her. But she couldn't hit her, because Aaliyah intercepted her hand. Of course, she remembers all the techniques from her past life, and now she amazed the Marquise with her strength. Aaliyah remembered Gerald's words about how her plans had been collapsing since her arrival, and she promised she would keep interfering because Caleb didn't deserve that treatment. At that instant, Cedric's voice resonated as he entered, and both girls turned at the same time. The Duke was with Caleb and the assistant Edwin. Probably the boy had called the adults. Gerald instantly put on an innocent victim face, expecting her lord to be on her side, and she declared that Lady Aaliyah had suddenly grabbed her, something that, obviously, shocked Aaliyah. But then, Caleb addressed the daughter of Marquise Babylon, and in an imperative tone, he declared that she no longer worked there, demanding that she leave immediately. Aaliyah was now even more shocked, and Gerald, completely confused, not understanding why everything had changed like this. She began to beg the little lord to explain why she was being fired, assuring him that she was not to blame for anything. The Marquise didn't expect this from the boy, who had always been on her side, and now, with a crazy face, she tried to understand at what moment everything had gone wrong. Then, Caleb took off his gloves and showed the scars, declaring that the teacher should understand the basis of his decision. And as he no longer wished to listen to her, he demanded again that she leave the duchy immediately. Gerald decided that Aaliyah had brainwashed the boy, and now years of her work had gone down the drain. Then she began to justify herself to Cedric, saying it was just a small punishment for not learning the lessons well. She pleaded for the situation to be clarified, but Aaliyah declared that nothing gives a teacher the right to resort to violence. The Marquise argued again, stating that a commoner knows nothing about aristocratic education. Aaliyah was so fed up with the Marquise's disgusting excuses that she finally decided to hit her. But then Cedric pulled her towards him, implying it wasn't worth getting his hands dirty with that scum. Gerald saw in this a glimmer of hope that the Lord would defend her, but he had no intention of doing so. He only warned severely that she would not get away with harming people close to him. Now the Marquise was required to leave, and moreover, her father was waiting for her at home for a lesson. However, she was not going to give up and demanded proof that she was the one who did it, because the wounds on the young lord's hands and the broken heels are not direct proof. Jerry was sure that with that they couldn't prove her guilt. Suddenly, her voice was heard in the room, as if someone had put on a recording, and in that recording, one could hear how the teacher humiliated the boy, insisting that he was not good enough. And that's why Lord Cedric would not be proud of him. This recording came from a magic sphere that the assistant Edwin held in his hands. The image of Gerald hitting the boy's palms as punishment could even be seen. Edwin brought that sphere on purpose, which Caleb had prepared in advance. And now everyone clearly heard and saw what the etiquette classes were really like. Caleb himself was satisfied that he had finally opened his eyes and decided to put the wrong teacher in her place. After that conversation with Aaliyah in the garden, he couldn't believe it immediately, but he really liked her. At the same time, Gerald's face constantly appeared before him, and he believed that she wouldn't hit him if he studied well. But when Elias got hurt, the boy realized that something was wrong and decided to tell his brother everything. Caleb approached Cedric, but still couldn't utter a word. It was as if Gerald kept whispering in his ear that his brother would be disappointed in him, and the boy feared that Cedric really hated him even more. But his brother noticed that the boy was in shock, trembling with fear, and he came closer and covered him with a blanket. Cedric started asking him what had happened, but Caleb feared even making a sound, and his terrified eyes showed that something horrible had happened. Cedric asked his little brother to sit on the sofa, and asked Edwin to bring 10 more blankets, and the boy felt as much warmth as he did in Aaliyah's house, and realized that his brother really cared. This gave him the courage to tell everything. Now, with everyone gathered in the room, Cedric asked them to stop looking, as he already understood everything. Aaliyah was worried about whether Caleb was okay after everything that had happened, but she noticed a smile on his face and now understood that he would be fine. However, this was not over yet. Gerald was not going to let it go, and she remembered that she was from the Babylon family and she couldn't be treated like this. Realizing that this shrew decided to go all the way, Aaliyah again felt the urge to touch up her makeup. But Cedric's look stopped her, warning her not to be carried away by emotions. And she told Gerald that she should be grateful that she was simply standing there, although her hand longed to destroy her. But then Caleb took that hand and reminded her that everything was fine now. Then, Cedric declared that the reputation of the Babylon family really spoke for itself. Therefore, this family should be an example for others. And in a month, this incident will be known not only throughout the duchy, but also in the entire capital. Later, it will be decided whether to expel Gerald from the family or not. Then, Cedric asked Edwin to accompany Elia outside so she could get some fresh air. And Gerald was gloomier than a storm cloud, realizing that now her family's reputation would be buried. She believed she had done everything perfectly well and blamed Elia, who arrived and ruined everything. Later, Elia could breathe a sigh of relief that everything was over. She did not forget the Marquise's look, as if everything was her fault, but she was glad she had done well. And now, when they were returning from the room along with Cedric and Caleb, her fiancé thanked her for everything. Because if it weren't for her, Caleb would still be suffering the Marquise's abuse. But now they had resolved everything. The young woman modestly explained that she hadn't done anything, and essentially that was true. It was mainly the brothers who suppressed the scoundrel. However, Cedric was sure that all the credit belonged to Elia, because if it weren't for her, he would still be living in ignorance, and his brother would continue to suffer abuse. And now the Duke didn't know how to thank this girl. She, for her part, was glad that the brothers could talk normally, and she believed that now everything would be fine. Suddenly, Cedric apologized to Elia for his rudeness, but she didn't understand what he meant. But then she remembered how he had hugged her when she decided to fix the Marquise's teeth. Cedric did that so that the vassals, bribed by the Marquis, would not dare to reproach Elia for anything. Moreover, the Duke promised that any physical contact with her would only take place after her consent. But Elia was not against it. He didn't do it with bad intentions, and then he noticed Caleb, who at that moment seemed the happiest of all. And she was happy for him. The girl was glad that the boy believed her words. No villain would prevent him from becoming Archduke. She wished that this boy would keep smiling like that always. Now, only not remembering anything tormented her. With memories, everything would be perfect. Then, Cedric set off to return to his office and asked Lady Elia to rest well. For an instant, their gazes met. It seemed like that moment lasted an eternity. Cedric was the first to react and apologized again for his rudeness. And suddenly, he took a lock of the girl's hair that fell over her shoulder. Elia didn't understand at first why he was doing that. Maybe something had gotten stuck in her hair, but the Duke brought his hair closer to his face. And he smelled it. This was very unexpected for the girl. She didn't know what to say at such an act. Cedric explained that he just wanted to check something and asked if Elia used perfume. Elia confessed that she had never bought anything like that, not understanding where her fiancé was going. Their conversation was interrupted by Caleb, who approached again, took her hair, and smelled it. At that moment, it reminded him of Junie. When she visited him in the hospital, she used deodorant, and it got into his hair. At first, he didn't understand why his brother smelled his hair, but then the nurse explained everything to him. And now Elia didn't mind the Duke smelling her hair, as long as everything was calm. Later, Yarel was returning home, and couldn't believe that something like this had happened to her. The entire way, she cursed the girl who had ruined all her plans in just a few days. Yarel also didn't believe that Cedric had fallen in love with a commoner, as if she were a witch. And now because of her, the Marquise could be kicked out of the family. After Gerald's return, a council of vassals was formed to discuss the exile of Marquis Babylon. As expected, the families bribed by the Marquis strongly opposed his expulsion, but those he oppressed did not miss the opportunity and argued that he was a traitor. The vassals pointed at each other and shouted. It was a truly disgusting spectacle. At that meeting, Cedric thanked Elia for having listened to her and for not bringing Caleb this time. He knew it was impossible to get rid of the Babylon family's influence in one fell swoop, but it could be gradually reduced to prevent something like this from happening again. Later, Marquis Reynold, with his huge belly sunken into an armchair, was happy to have avoided exile. His wife supported him as best she could, happy that this problem had been resolved. Now they should remain hidden, but the Marquis didn't want to leave it like that and planned to appeal. They are blood relatives of the former Archduchess, and if they are exiled, they will have to be protected. That's why Reynold believed Cedric would consider his appeal. But he became enraged when he saw Cedric simply return his letter. Not even the seal was broken, which meant the Duke didn't even bother to read it. This exasperated the Marquis. He is the head of the maternal family. Then, he learned that another message had arrived from the duchy. Cedric guessed that the Marquis would ask to reduce the deadline, but he requested that he use that time better. He also asked them to thank him for not increasing it, and now the Marquises cannot leave the property for the whole week. After this, Reynold went mad. He started destroying everything around him. Breathless, he began to curse Cedric, who dared to defy a true aristocrat. The Marquis hated the Duke and his fiancée and swore he wouldn't leave them in peace. A week after Yarrel's dismissal, the atmosphere in the duchy completely changed. Elia enjoyed life, often walking in the garden, and Caleb found new tutors whom he liked at first sight. Before, the young lord did not express emotions, and now it was pleasant to see him so open. Even the maid, Olivia, was happy to see the boy so outgoing. His face was no longer sad, and he conversed kindly with the new teachers. Elia noticed that Caleb had changed a lot, and these changes made her very happy, because when they met, he was cold and silent, not saying a word about the pain he felt. In that regard, the brothers seemed somewhat similar to the girl. But then, she realized that she knew very little about Cedric, and almost everything she knew was from Caleb. In the novel, he was not described well, and he himself rarely talked about himself. It seemed strange to Elia not to know anything about each other, even if it was just a contract marriage. Later, she met with Cedric to discuss some wedding details, but there were still many to finalize. Now Elia had to deal with buying clothes, so many that it was exhausting for her. She decided to vary her duties and remembered that the couple's favorite dishes were served at the wedding table, and she declared that she herself could easily take care of preparing those dishes. But for that, she needed to know what Cedric preferred in order to prepare everything necessary. The Duke confessed that he was not demanding and would eat whatever Elia liked, but he didn't seem very happy, adding that it was already too late to think about his favorite food. Currently, his 5 senses are gradually paralyzed by the curse. The young woman was visibly shocked by such a revelation. Cedric, realizing that he hadn't expressed himself well, clarified that his senses were dulling, as if falling asleep. Now he neither tastes nor smells. That's why he doesn't enjoy eating much. That's why Elia can make a list of dishes to his liking, as everyone knows the Duke's curse. Elia remembered that it was so, that curse where one is not dead, but not alive either, and nothing can wake him up. Now Cedric has only lost his sense of taste, but the young woman did not feel relieved. The Duke noticed a strange expression on Elia's face and got worried. But then he remembered that he had asked her if she used perfume and wanted to know what that meant. It was a mystery to Cedric too. For a long time, he smelled many things and felt nothing. However, he clearly smells the aroma emanating from Elia, and that disconcerted her a little. It seemed strange to him, as he doesn't even perceive the aroma of strong tea. Nevertheless, he hears Elia's scent quite clearly. The girl suspected it was because she cast a curse, and that could be a problem. Elia feared that the Duke could guess, and a sudden thunder with a bright lightning bolt added adrenaline. From the fright, the girl almost wet herself, but both didn't understand why the storm started so suddenly, although Cedric started to suspect. At that moment, from the other side of the room, Caleb's voice was heard, and Elia, startled, she got scared again. The boy was standing in the doorway, as if nothing had happened. Then, cheerfully, he declared that it was raining, and asked Elia to prepare potato pancakes for him. Like that time in the cabin, Cedric was confused, while Elia remembered saying that draniki are made when it rains. A few minutes ago, the sun was shining, and Caleb was in a separate office. He was doing homework and finished sooner than he thought. Bored, he didn't know what to do. Besides, Elia is busy with wedding preparations. Even after dinner, he left quickly, although he really didn't want to bother his siblings. And suddenly, the boy longed for the food Elia prepared when they were alone in the forest cabin. Then Caleb ate potato soup, and he also loved the draniki. But since they are only prepared when it rains, he is out of luck now because it is sunny. Suddenly, Caleb began to doubt, as Elia said she remembered nothing about herself. However, she remembers preparing draniki for someone, although she might remember something about cooking. And if her memory returns completely, she will leave for home again. Caleb was saddened by that. He wanted to spend more time with her while she was there. And literally, in a few minutes, a storm began, and Caleb appeared asking her to prepare draniki. The girl was even a little happy that, because of that, the topic of conversation with Cedric would change. She was glad for the boy's visit, although she didn't understand how he had appeared so opportunely. and she gladly promised to demonstrate her culinary skills again. Caleb also noticed that his brother lately had no appetite and asked him to eat Draniki with them. Elia understood that Caleb still didn't know about Cedric's dulling senses, but she decided not to rush things, and the boy assured that as soon as his brother saw the Draniki, he would immediately feel hungry. My God, even I'm craving Draniki. Elia went to the kitchen to prepare the ordered dish, while the dukes waited at the table. The chef had never cooked anything like that, but he understood that it required a lot of fat, and Elia stated that Draniki turn out better fried, although the chef didn't even know that word. The girl explained that by frying something in abundant oil, a crispy crust is created. At the same time, she was glad that the cook was not offended by being removed from the kitchen. Very soon the dish was ready, and Aaliyah placed it on the table with great theatricality. This time, the Draniki had a slightly different shape, but Caleb was drooling to try them. Aaliyah suggested eating them with sauce this time and wished the brothers bon appetit. And as soon as Caleb tasted the first bite, he was incredibly fascinated by the flavor. They seemed even more delicious to him than the previous time, and he insisted that Cedric should try it. As long as there was any left, Caleb would devour it all. The Duke looked at the piece of Draniki like something strange, seeing no point in eating it, since he couldn't taste it. But Elias felt uncomfortable, knowing that it was all her fault, and wanted to recover her memories even faster. Cedric noticed her worried face and asked her not to be upset, especially since he was already used to that reaction. However, Elias felt uncomfortable, knowing that it was all her fault, and wanted to recover her memories even faster. Then, Cedric put the piece of Draniki in his mouth, when suddenly his face changed drastically. Incomprehensible sounds came out of his throat, which greatly frightened Elia and Caleb. The girl was especially frightened, fearing that her fiancé might have been poisoned or, at least, choked. They began to lament over Cedric, not understanding what had happened. The cook messed up by saying the food was poisoned, but Caleb scolded him. He was fine. Poor Elia was a bundle of nerves. His face reflected an incomprehensible terror. He wanted to call a doctor, but Cedric stopped them all dead in their tracks and declared that nothing bad had happened, that they had simply misunderstood everything. Suddenly, his face lit up with happiness, and he confessed that he hadn't tasted food in a long time. But Elia, in shock, still didn't understand anything. It turned out that he had indeed tasted the flavor. Caleb interrupted instantly, realizing that his brother couldn't taste. The curse was intensifying. Cedric apologized to his brother for not telling him sooner, but Caleb asked him not to apologize, only not to hide anything similar from him in the future. Elia was glad that they both had a good conversation. Before, they didn't express their feelings at all, although she herself was completely unable to concentrate now. And Caleb became curious why his brother could taste it now. Cedric didn't know how to explain it, and Elia suspected it was because she had prepared it herself. She cast the curse. At the same time, she hoped Cedric wouldn't guess that she was the fairy. In any case, now she is the key to lifting the curse. Suddenly, Cedric paid attention to Elia, and she, under the influence of her own thoughts, got scared to death again. It turned out the Duke only wanted to ask for more, and the girl's spirit settled down. Near evening, before going to sleep, Elia was taking a bath and delving into her thoughts. At the same time, she felt very tired from being very nervous lately. Even the maid, Olivia, noticed that the lady was completely depressed. But at the same time, she felt very grateful to Elia, although the latter didn't understand why. According to Olivia, since Elia arrived at the duchy, the atmosphere in the castle changed a lot. The young woman herself remembered her first impression, that this place wasn't for people to live in. It was silent and gloomy. And after Elia's arrival, many felt warmth in the castle for the first time. Olivia hadn't even expected to see Cedric and Caleb conversing as cheerfully as today. The maid noticed that the boy had changed a lot, and along with him, his older brother. Cedric's expression softened a lot, and today Olivia, like other maids, saw his smile for the first time. Olivia believed that love had influenced him this way, and she was glad that the Lord knew this feeling. Elia, on the other hand, remembers that this is only a contract marriage. Furthermore, she didn't believe they should thank her for everything, and she found it hard to smile, as she knew she herself was the cause of Cedric's problem. Then the maid left her lady, and she returned to reflecting on everything that had happened. Now sometimes she has to prepare Cedric's favorite dishes, but that doesn't scare her at all. Meanwhile, Cedric was in his room, observing the night sky attentively. He recalled how they were returning from the kitchen, and the storm had also ceased suddenly. Cedric already suspected before that the storm had been somehow provoked by the little mischief maker, and now he became more and more convinced of it. After all, his family possesses magic capable of controlling the weather. And undoubtedly, this time it was Caleb who altered the weather. But this magic requires a huge amount of power. Many tried to use it but failed. For over 100 years, no one could master it, and Cedric revives it at 18. He tried to teach it to Caleb, but no, it was simply impossible. Although his older brother believed in his potential to fully master it, but the boy doubted, thinking that he didn't have his brother's strength. That's why he failed. Caleb wanted to give up, convinced that only failure awaited him, like so many in his family. And in the end, Cedric stopped insisting that his brother study that magic. Now he was intrigued how Caleb conjured that storm, which lasted for hours. Then he remembered that the boy could use magic, even with his injured hand, and now triumphs in weather magic. After always failing, it seemed very strange to Cedric, but the Duke noticed something. All these changes began after the encounter with Elia. He searched for information about her, but couldn't find out anything about her or her family. And that Cedric could only sense her aroma seemed incredible. This girl is obviously full of secrets. At that moment, what the Duke desired most was to know who this girl really was. The next morning, Elia looked out the window and noticed that the weather invited her for a walk. She also had to choose a spot in the garden for lunch, as this time 3 people would be eating. It was then that she realized that, when she thought about food, she felt peace. Lately everything had been chaos, but now the wedding date was set, and the rest is going relatively well. However, something worried her, and it was the protagonist of the novel, Daphne Marinist. Elia also thought that if she lifted Cedric's curse, Caleb wouldn't sink into darkness, and he wouldn't be at war with the imperial family Marinist. But then it is unclear what future awaits Daphne. Meanwhile, in the imperial palace, a blue-haired girl, Daphne, was walking in the garden. There, the little prince saw her and complimented her beautiful appearance. This prince is called Renoa de Parudio Getipsi and Pricent, and he had a good relationship with the little Duchess Daphne Marinist. They often spent time walking in the garden, and the prince used to praise her. He also liked to smell her hair. Apparently, it is a strange tradition in the empire. So this time, when they were preparing to chat about everything, the prince was suddenly called away. Daphne promised to wait for him, and she was happy to be happy now, compared to how she was before returning. In reality, she was a bit tired of talking to the 6-year-old prince, as she felt much older. She was also 6 now, but she had returned to the past, after dying at 16. Now she is reliving her 6 years in this life. Again, a world where magic is as common as breathing. But before, Daphne couldn't control even a bit of mana. Her magical lineage was questioned. No one understood it. Her father, Duke Calvados Marinist, denied everything. But he didn't train her. He expected nothing from her, of course. Her presence calming rumors made her even more unhappy. Soon, a banquet for Prince Renoa's birthday. Everyone seemed happy. The party was a splurge of joy. But the prince went out onto the terrace, and a fairy appeared. At that instant, Renoa let his guard down and the fairy cast a curse on him. Daphne, who was said to be unable to protect her family, was nearby. In the end, they blamed her, and she immediately became the great traitor, and was sentenced to death. Daphne was destined to be executed in prison as soon as she reached adulthood. The Marquise Yarel herself visited her, and she didn't even pretend to feel pity for the girl. The Marquise lamented wasting so much time on her, and it was all in vain. Yarel reproached Daphne for not using her magic, and for not sacrificing herself. After that, the girl believed it was her fault, and that she was destined to not be loved by her father. Some time later, Calvados himself came to see her, and Daphne hoped he could free her. The young woman was right. Her father couldn't imagine his daughter being executed, and helped her escape from prison. And she ran through the forest in the middle of the dark night. She needed to flee while she had a chance. Her father begged her to flee as far away as possible, promising there would be no nights on the way. He had to stay there. Daphne still didn't understand why he had decided to help her so suddenly. In reality, Calvados wanted his daughter to live happily, doing whatever she wished. And the girl fled. Joy overflowed her upon seeing that her father hadn't given up. But at the same time, her face was washed with bitter tears at having to part with her family. She ran for a long time, and only the moon lit her way, and silence reigned in the forest. As if there wasn't even a beast. For a moment she stopped, feeling the urge to return to her father. but she knew that they would execute him anyway, and that would kill him, so she ran even faster. Daphne understood that the reason her father had silenced the rumors was so that she could live freely, and he wanted his daughter to flee to a place very, very far away. Now, sitting at the table, Daphne remembered how she tried to escape, but then a deep precipice blocked her way, and she barely managed to break to avoid falling. And behind her, she heard the voices of the knights pursuing her. The girl turned clumsily towards them, slipped, and fell into the abyss, towards death. Then she thought everything was over, and now, she couldn't believe she had a second chance. After returning, Daphne wanted to live a normal life and began to think about how to prevent the fairy from attending the banquet, although she understood that she couldn't stop her. For unknown reasons, this time the fairy appeared 10 years earlier, and Daphne used the mirror shield magic, which she had never trained for, hoping to be lucky. It is magic that summons a shield made of mirrors and can reflect any magic and curse. Moreover, it is the only thing that can block a fairy's magic. The current imperial family came to power thanks to a rebellion. 200 years ago, when the emperor was a fairy, the current Ipresents rose up. They possessed the powerful mirror shield magic, and that helped them succeed. The Marinist family descends from a secondary line of the Ipresents. That's why Daphne could use the magic. Before returning, she teleported to the Temple of Knowledge, where she unconsciously mastered the mirror shield magic. And while thinking about it, the prince returned, explaining that they would have to part ways for today. Daphne knew that Rinoa would also have to learn this magic. Despite everything, the imperial family tried to stay away from her, believing that this girl could be an obstacle to Rinoa becoming crown prince. And since she also masters mirror magic, they might think she also wants to claim the throne. Daphne regularly read the newspapers to find out what changes had occurred because of her. And once she read that the Indigence family had an incident with the daughter of Marquis Babylon. Right now, the ducal family is in the spotlight, as Cedric is marrying soon. Daphne noticed that his fiancé had a somewhat uncomfortable facial expression, but she also noticed her silver hair, iridescent and pink, and her eyes like precious gems. Hair like that is quite rare and is usually exclusive to fairies. There, Daphne understood that while blocking a fairy spell, Cedric fell under another. However, there was no way she could help the Duke. Suddenly, Daphne saw from the carriage window a figure covered with a dark cloak and a large hood. That person reached out to the little girl, who was immediately illuminated by a glow, and she understood that something terrible was happening. Meanwhile, Caleb was very happy that they were finally eating together. The boy was also happy that his brother could now taste food again. Cedric seemed calmer because of it, and Aaliyah was pleased to have been able to help him in some way with his curse. She remembered Olivia's words, who also noticed that he had changed and started smiling. And as their meal unfolded in the most pleasant atmosphere, Edwin unexpectedly appeared. His appearance during dinner meant that something important had happened. Approaching the Duke, he informed him that someone demanded his attention. Cedric's face suddenly darkened, and Aaliyah became uneasy. But then, she herself felt a chill upon hearing Edwin announce the kidnapping of Princess Marinist. And for now, the kidnapper's identity is unknown. The news of the abduction visibly disturbed the Duke. Elia, on the other hand, panicked and even shouted at the table. The news left her in shock. Even Edwin worried a little, but now about the state of the future Duchess. He suspected that Elia knew who Daphne was, and she, so as not to give herself away, said she was worried about any kidnapping. In reality, she was nervous because this case was very similar to what happened in the original story. After Daphne returned and got rid of the curse, a fairy suddenly appeared and tried to kidnap her in a fit of rage. But the plan failed, and the fairy was locked up in the imperial family's prison. Everything was like the original story, only Elia didn't kidnap Daphne. And if the current plot is so similar, it means our heroine is not Elia, although two people might share the same name. And physical features. The girl supposed she might have a twin sister, separated a long time ago, and if everything continues as in the original, the only way to break Cedric's curse will be lost. The girl looked at her fiancé fearfully. He asked what was wrong, and she said she was just thinking about something else. Then she asked where Lady Marinist had been kidnapped from, and learned it was on the way to the duchy, when returning from the imperial palace. And there is no more information on this matter for now. Elia noticed that Caleb was very thoughtful, and his face showed some displeasure. The boy understood the situation, but didn't see why his brother had to get involved. That opinion seemed rather cruel and selfish to the young woman, although she understood the boy's reaction. Since he had heard a name he didn't want to hear. At a certain point, Duke Marinist officially requested the cooperation of the main families, everyone except indigents, as their family magic is not suitable for searching and investigations. Family magic can only be used by family members. Some can transform into dogs, and others worked as detectives using psychometry. But gravity magic doesn't fit well with that, and that's why those families aren't considered strong. There is also the Maishalata family, which possesses material magic, and only 3 families, Malashat, Marinist, and Indigents, are allowed to enter the Temple of Knowledge, where all knowledge is kept, and if desired, the secrets of each family can be discovered. Because of this, these 3 families try to maintain balance among themselves, but only the Maishalat sent the request. Suddenly, Elia noticed that Cedric's face had darkened, and she became very worried. He believed it was crucial to verify the information that the 2 families were collaborating. Cedric was cursed because Princess Daphne heroically protected the prince. However, he always maintained a good relationship with the powerful Marinist family. During the defense of the prince, it was an unfortunate accident, so Cedric didn't even ask for compensation. Now the Duke suspected that they might be hiding something similar to what they themselves were hiding. Immediately afterwards, he ordered Edwin to send people to the capital to unmask this dark situation, and he warned that everything must be done in silence. Cedric and his brother began to think what to do when Elia stopped them, and declared that they themselves should take the first step. Because the information could leak, so they must take control and offer to help. Cedric still hesitated, and Elia began to think how to convince him. If the one who kidnapped Daphne is actually a fairy, the opportunity to save Cedric might be lost, since another person will not be able to remove his curse, and Elia asked her future husband to go to the capital together, because she wanted to check everything herself. Very soon, Elia, Cedric, and Caleb were walking through a street in the capital. The girl was very determined and ready to face whatever came. A few hours earlier, she had told Olivia that only 3 people would go to the capital. They planned to go in total secrecy, so the minimum number of people possible will travel. But the maid feared it would be too dangerous and begged her to reconsider the plan. Elia was calm, as she would go with Cedric, Strong Now, and Caleb, who will be in the future. Olivia then remembered how other maids commented that she was very accommodating to the commoner. The maids thought that Olivia had lost all her dignity and served that lady. At that moment, Elia appeared nearby, and they got scared that she might have overheard them. The young woman simply offered them help carrying the goods, as they were very heavy. But they refused, worried that the lady might hurt her delicate hands. However, Elia decided to prove she wasn't as weak as she looked and grabbed a box. With it on her shoulder and a grim face, Elia only asked where she should take it. Then she added that, with their delicate arms, they would only carry that box, the maids the rest. And to avoid the Duke's anger, the maids had no choice but to obey. Elia decided not to complicate things and handed them her box too, hurrying them to move. Olivia observed this situation from the corner and now, remembering it, smiled without realizing it. Even so, she worried about Lady Elia's safety, but she asked her not to worry. And now, here are the 3 of them, walking through the streets of the capital. Among the crowd, they approached a couple to cunningly extract information. Elia declared that she and her family had come to have fun, but they noticed a tense atmosphere. And those people told them about the unfortunate incident that had happened recently. After learning something, Elia noticed that the 2 Duke brothers were together outside the palace, probably for the first time. It wouldn't be bad to take a look, but first they must find Daphne, the kidnapped girl. Above all, Elia must find out if she is the main culprit for everything that is happening. She also needs to know what details are different from the original. In the original story, the fairy cursed Renoir when he was 16. But after Daphne's return, they cursed him at 6 years old. It is not understood what made the fairy curse him 10 years earlier. And that was not in the original story. Elias kept thinking about what to do to resolve this mistake. At that moment, Cedric noticed that more and more knights were appearing and suggested moving towards the residential streets. For Elia, this was a good opportunity to get more information. But after a while, they failed to discover anything new, and the girl became desperate. A bit tired, they decided to take a small break before continuing their journey. Elia noticed that the place was very quiet, and everyone seemed to live in peace. Her attention focused on 2 boys who, at first glance, seemed to be brothers. But she was more worried about breaking Cedric's curse as soon as possible, so that he and his brother could live in peace. The Duke realized that his fiancée was, again, lost in thought. He remembered how she screamed hysterically upon learning of Daphne's kidnapping, and how afterwards she begged him to take the first step. Cedric found her behavior strange, as if she knew something. He hoped to find out something about Aaliyah when they traveled to the capital together, and he was burning to discover what secrets that beautiful creature kept. And peculiar, a sudden childish scream interrupted the tension between them. Some children were playing cheerfully, and the boy's sister was asking if he had had fun. Elia found the scene adorable and smiled tenderly, relaxed, but Cedric was tense. He wanted to ask Elia everything at once, but he hesitated. And just when he finally mustered up the courage and reached his hand out to her, the girl suddenly jumped up, saying she had regained her strength, and proposed they continue. Then she called Caleb, who was staring fixedly to one side. The boy was so absorbed in something that he didn't even hear Aaliyah calling him the first time. The girl also started looking in that direction, trying to understand what attracted him so much. Not far from the counter, a man was preparing candies and selling them to the children. They were lemon and honey candies, and Elia remembered that Caleb loves lemons. Now she supposed this boy also liked sweets, but he was ashamed to ask for them. So she took the initiative and suggested Caleb buy one of those candies. The boy was happy when Cedric declared that eating street food wasn't safe. Elia looked at him with some displeasure, as she almost always fed herself this way, and Cedric noticed how his brother's mood immediately dropped, and immediately declared that candies are refreshing and can clear the mind. Yes, he needed to philosophize a bit to compensate his brother and not seem so harsh. Caleb immediately received a lollipop, and the vendor noticed that there was a very handsome boy in front of him. The little Duke kindly thanked him for the candy and prepared to taste it immediately. His sweet little voice and pretty little face moved the candy vendor. Then the three of them sat down again while the little one savored the treat. And at that moment, Elia felt that they were a real family, happy even without titles. Then she noticed how more children approached the stall, wishing to eat a candy. And these two children looked like a brother and a sister. Elia liked watching them, and she remembered her younger brother again. But then she supposed these children had little money, since the sister only bought one candy for the brother, depriving herself, and she even refused for him to share with her, asking him to eat it all by himself. Cedric noticed a strange expression on his fiancée's face again and asked what was happening. But the young woman only asked them both to stay there for a moment. She approached the counter, bought another lollipop, and gave it to the girl. And her brother was happy that his sister could also enjoy sweets. But the girl became embarrassed. She felt uncomfortable receiving a gift from a stranger. Still, she accepted the gift and thanked the kind lady for her kindness. After that, they said goodbye, and Elia prepared to return with her dukes. Cedric watched his fiancée at that moment and was increasingly surprised. And the vendor struck up a pleasant conversation with her, guessing that she had come to the city to rest with her family. And he recommended visiting a square with a fountain, which had a very beautiful view. Cedric wasn't listening to what they were talking about. He only saw their smiles and felt a little jealous. Elia explained to the vendor that bad rumors were circulating about that square, trying to extract information from him. He confessed that the atmosphere in the capital was tense and that all the knights and soldiers were very busy. The vendor himself couldn't believe that Princess Daphne had been kidnapped. Elia didn't understand how a commoner knew about the kidnapping, although there might be an announcement for those people. The Marinist family is one of the three supporting the empire. Furthermore, Daphne protected the prince, and that this girl was kidnapped was a real blow to the family. But only the initiated know the truth. Elia decided to keep asking. When that boy suddenly approached her, Cedric started getting nervous because his fiancée was taking a long time to return, and he himself went to look for her. The boy, meanwhile, whispered to her that he had brought her a gift because she bought a lollipop for his sister, and that was very important to him. Elia thanked him and promised to take care of the gift. Then she reached out her hand to receive something small. The gift turned out to be a simple beetle, and since Elia, even in her past life, feared cockroaches, she turned pale instantly like chalk. Then her piercing shriek was heard, which alarmed Cedric. The girl really wanted to throw the insect away, but she didn't want to offend the boy either, even though she was disgusted by it. And explaining to Cedric that she was screaming with joy, in panic, she accidentally tripped and started falling backwards. Seeing this, Cedric ran towards her so fast that his cap even fell off his head. Everyone else immediately paid attention to the situation, where the lady could get hurt. But fortunately, the Duke had time to use magic. Before she broke the back of her neck against the curb, Elia was suspended in the air. Anti-gravity acted on her. The Duke wouldn't arrive in time running, so he saved her that way. Then he apologized, but Elia was grateful. Her brains weren't on the ground, although she wished the Duke would catch her, like in romantic novels. Because of that, she felt a little disappointed. However, the vendor noticed that the Duke used magic, and he began to suspect who was in front of him. When a man fell, still, it doesn't prevent the man from recognizing the indigent's family, and Elia felt uncomfortable for being discovered so foolishly. Then, the men introduced themselves. The vendor was Alonso, and the other Jordan, and it seemed no one but them had noticed the incident. Nevertheless, the Duke and the lady admitted that they went out to find something out. So Elia addressed Alonso, sensing that he knew something, like being aware of the princess's kidnapping. And now, he won't be able to simply get away with it, because the girl clearly heard his words. So, Alonso confessed that he recently sold candies in another neighborhood, and there a buyer spoke about it. The carriage returning from the imperial palace unexpectedly disappeared right in front of that man. Elia found that kidnapping method strange. And moreover, at the kidnapping site there was someone motionless, completely covered by a robe, who also disappeared instantly. The description of the robe matched the fairy's attire described in the novel. And at first people thought the carriage was transported by magic, since that family deals with magic. But judging by the circumstances, kidnapping seems a more accurate explanation. The buyer who told this story came from the gates of the Elphium Square. And since there is construction there, he came via the main road, where the main path of magical energy lies. Due to the construction, no one has approached this place for several days. Elia understood that there would be fewer witnesses in that place. But that man made a mistake. The main path of magical energy transmits magic from the Emperor's castle to the residential areas. This path is traced with magic stones that prevent the uncontrolled use of magic in the castle. And if you use magic nearby, the stone will show traces of that person. To see those traces requires powerful magic, and Cedric met the requirements well. However, he wanted to make sure that the candy vendor was telling him the truth. The latter swore he had never seen anything like it, but every word he said was true. Then Cedric thanked him for the information and extended a bag. It was full of gold coins, and Alonso, like his companion, were happy to be useful. After that, they started saying goodbye, as they still had much to do. But Caleb stood frozen and stared at the candies again. Alonso noticed the boy's insistent look and knew he wanted more sweets. The vendor sincerely wanted to treat the little Duke, but his companion pushed him not to give away his merchandise. Even so, Caleb got the coveted candy, and with a satisfied face promised he would definitely eat it. Then the Dukes headed to the square, which was not that far. On the way, Cedric suddenly asked if this was what Elia was talking to Alonso about. She admitted that the vendor had even recommended some great family parks to her. Hearing this, the Duke relaxed a bit and even smiled sweetly. It seems Elia didn't understand his jealousy, nor why he asked that question. Meanwhile, Calvados Marinus discovered something about the indigent's family, and gathering some men, he planned to go search for his daughter immediately. In another gloomy place, they tied Daphne up and blindfolded her to avoid trouble. The girl couldn't understand where she was, besides not being able to move at all. She only realized she had been kidnapped, although the reason was unknown. Still, Daphne tried to calm down, believing her father would find and save her. The princess knew she was in a basement, like in the past, by the stench of the cold air. But she also understood that it wasn't the imperial palace dungeon. It didn't smell like that there. That individual in the dark robe who kidnapped Daphne was walking right through the forest. And he was glad that everything went according to plan. It only remained to wait for one person, and everything would return to normal. Hearing footsteps behind him, the individual rejoiced that the person he was waiting for had arrived. But it turned out to be the indigent's Duke, and this terrified the person in the robe. The kidnapper was immediately caught in a magical gravity trap and fell to the ground with all his limbs. Cedric advised him not to move so as not to break anything, and Elia was glad they found the scoundrel. Then, the Duke explained to the kidnapper that they had followed his magical trace, the path of magic flow. Thus, he calculated his location, and now everyone saw that the kidnapper was Marquis Babylon. He was furious because the guilds he asked for help left their mark, and Cedric demanded an explanation about the whereabouts of Princess Marinus. But Reynold only cursed the Duke, who ruined his plans again. In the novel, the Marquis was at some point called the future Great Mage. Even as an adult, he lived thinking he was superior to the people around him. Seeking affirmation, he humiliated others. But then Cedric appeared, a true genius. Even as a child, he noticed that the Marquis's magic left revealing traces, and he advised him to try harder, so Reynolds could enhance the spell. Then, Cedric demonstrated his family's unique magic, which they showed him only once. Without understanding the complexity of the magic, the boy used it without thinking, like breathing. Soon he became a great mage, but all that remained in the past. After Cedric was cursed, the Marquis used him at his whim. And now Reynolds was furious, because the Duke had thwarted his plans. But what angered him most was seeing Elia standing, looking at him proudly. The Marquis was now sure that everything had gone wrong with the arrival of that commoner. He looked at her fixedly like a rabid dog, ready to bite the leg. Elia was somewhat shocked that Reynolds was behind everything, but they still had to find Daphne. Cedric again ordered the Marquis to reveal where he had hidden Princess Marinist. Reynolds only hissed between his teeth, believing his plan would work anyway. Then he declared that they had to go up to the cabin, and there they could find Daphne. The heroes, of course, prepared to immediately go rescue the captive girl. But the Marquis, in reality, only wanted to buy time. Afterwards, Daphne heard someone coming, but thought it was her kidnapper, although she noticed that those people were struggling with the door. So someone was coming to save her. Elia, indeed, finally struggled for a while with the lock, which surely had a magic seal. She was furious that the lock wouldn't give, and with an effort, she simply ripped it off completely. Both Cedric and Caleb looked with great astonishment at this fragile-looking girl. Then she suddenly opened the door, and a torrent of fresh air flooded the smelly room. At that instant, daylight faintly illuminated Daphne's face, who was tied up. She heard someone promise to free her, and that voice sounded very, very familiar. But the savior wasn't Aaliyah or the Dukes. When they entered that dilapidated room, no one was inside, and Daphne received a visit from Marquis Gerald, who begged the princess not to fear anymore, as she was coming for her. Later, the furious Dukes returned with the Marquis, who was still stuck to the floor, and they demanded explanations why he had lied to them, since the cabin was empty. He grumbled that he kept her away from there, and that no one could find her. Then, in an angry tone, he addressed Lady Elia, declaring that he couldn't keep listening to her voice, and he asked her to leave immediately. He asked the Dukes not to believe that girl, believing she was brainwashing them, and he falsely accused his daughter. Furthermore, the Marquis decided to blame Elia for the kidnapping of Princess Marinist. Gerald, meanwhile, was also assuring Daphne that Lady Elia, the Duke's fiancée, ordered her kidnapping. That girl asked a dark guild to take care of the matter, and then they locked her in this place. Daphne couldn't believe the future Duchess was capable of such a thing, but Gerald kept insisting on it. Apparently, as soon as Aaliyah knew that the princess could break Cedric's curse, she decided to eliminate her. Gerald also complained about how that girl threatened them and begged them to accept the job. But they refused, and almost crying, she declared that Aaliyah had accused her of mistreating the young Duke. That's why she didn't find out about the princess's kidnapping immediately and regretted it very much. For some reason, Duke Marinist and Marquis Babylon had a pretty good relationship. But since there was no mutual benefit, rumors circulated that they were planning something together. That's why Reynolds was so sure of his victory. Princess Marinist knew Gerald from childhood, so she had no reason to doubt. Daphne even taught that woman the prince's mirror shield magic. The imperial family trusted the Marinists, and the Marinists trusted the Babylons. It is unlikely that Duke Marinist, upon learning of this, will let it go just like that. Neither Cedric nor Caleb will be able to do anything. It will be an imperial order, and the end for Aaliyah. But right now, the Duke brothers don't believe a word the Marquis says about Aaliyah. On the contrary, they believe the Babylons planned the kidnapping and would blame her. But the young woman, even so, felt very depressed. Caleb took her hand and asked her not to worry, promising to fix everything. His smile returned Aaliyah's lost confidence and spirit, and she felt very proud of this boy, who believes in her honesty and is ready to defend her. At the same time, she was very worried about what was happening to Daphne. Elia was so absorbed in the fairy that she didn't think at all about the princess's condition, and she prayed that those people wouldn't harm the girl, so that she would agree to testify against them. But then, Elia remembered how upset Reynolds was when he saw them. That means he was expecting someone else, and probably Daphne is somewhere in this forest. But there was also no time to wait for confessions from the Marquis. The girl ran out, explaining to the dukes that she was going up a bit further to take a look. And she confessed her suspicions that the princess was somewhere nearby. Cedric worried that his future wife was going into the forest alone, but the girl asked him not to worry and promised to return very quickly. For her safety, Caleb went after her, after all, and Cedric had time to deal with the miserable Babylon, who was smiling, saying that the person he was waiting for would arrive soon and everything would turn out as he wanted. Reynold and his daughter were looking forward to their victory, while the Marquise urged Daphne to flee, to go to a safer place. But the Babylons didn't count on Princess Marinist having returned to the past. That's why she didn't believe a single word from the young Marquise. Jiril was in shock. She had tried so hard to convince the girl that she was telling the truth, but she kept repeating that she wouldn't believe a single word that came out of her mouth. It was a surprise for the Marquise. She claimed she had no reason to lie and that she must believe her. Daphne sighed heavily, but she couldn't confess that she had returned to the past. But she admitted that before she believed the Marquise because she took care of her. But now everything is different. She perfectly remembered how the Marquise revealed her true personality. Then she exploded and confessed that she truly disliked a child who couldn't even use magic. Now Daphne understood that this woman was trying to frame an innocent person with her help. And she declared that, from that moment on, she would not allow herself to be fooled anymore. Jiril was disconcerted. The girl who until recently lacked self-confidence was now thwarting her plans. And while thinking about how to fix the situation, the little girl tried to slip away. But the Marquise grabbed her arm and looked at her with a gaze so furious, as if she were going to crush her against the wall. Then she demanded loudly that she trust her, declaring that she wouldn't leave her alone. Her gaze and voice softened, trying to convince Daphne to cooperate. She insisted that it was all a misunderstanding, that they were doing it for the princess's own good. It is unknown why, but Daphne yielded to the Marquise's persuasion and followed her nowhere. But then she remembered her past life, behind bars, and her father's order to flee. Instantly, she broke free and ran away from the Marquise. Fortunately, the door wasn't locked, and the princess managed to escape. She found herself in the middle of the forest, searching for the way back to the capital. Suddenly, some guys in robes appeared, sent by Marquis Babylon to rescue her. They too tried to convince Daphne to go with them to a safe place. At that instant, she remembered how the knights invited her in the same way, and she knew it was a trap. The girl ran off in the opposite direction, away from those scoundrels. And at that moment, a disheveled Marquise came out of her huts screaming to catch the princess. Jiril was determined to convince the girl again to trust her, or they would all be lost. And again, Daphne was running through the forest, understanding that she had to escape as far as possible. She didn't understand why something like this was happening to her again, when she only wanted to live a quiet life. Ironically, Princess Marinist found herself again on the edge of that very same cliff. For an instant she felt fear, and behind her echoed the voices of Jiril and her servants. Daphne turned again to see how close they had gotten. She tripped again and fell into the void from the cliff. The Marquise got scared, because it was no longer just a kidnapping, it would be the murder of the princess. Daphne thought about changing her destiny, but everything happens the same. She prepared to meet death, hoping never to have to relive this. Suddenly, Elia, appearing out of nowhere, grabbed her hand. Daphne saw her pink hair and eyes like gems, and guessed who was in front of her. Elia was glad to have caught the little one, and now they were falling together. But she turned so that the princess remained on top, hoping the fall wouldn't hurt much. Then she felt Cedric's arms lifting her up, reprimanding her for being so reckless. Of course he was worried. If he hadn't arrived in time, his fiancée could have been injured. And Elia only thanked the Duke for coming to her rescue. It wasn't the first time. Cedric couldn't stay angry for long. The important thing was that that girl was well. Then Elia asked what had happened to Caleb. Jiril saw them from above, not understanding how they got there, and her face filled with terror. Her servants whispered, planning to flee before sinking even further. They tried to teleport quickly, but failed and fell to the ground. Duke Caleb approached. The atmosphere was so tense that it seemed the earth was shaking. His face was brimming with anger, and he warned them not to even think of escaping. Meanwhile, Elia visually examined the princess, hoping she was well. Daphne was curious to know how those two had gotten there, and Elia told everything they had to do to find and save the princess. Now, the future Duchess was sincerely happy that the little one was safe, but then she remembered they hadn't introduced themselves, and announced herself as Duke Cedric's fiancée. Daphne was still somewhat shocked and asked the lady to take her hand. Immediately after, they prepared to head to a safe place. And the princess, clinging to Elia, felt an incredible and comforting warmth coming from her. Before she tried to escape alone, but now she truly felt safe. Elia noticed the princess was trembling a bit and understood she was still somewhat scared. Then, discreetly, she asked Cedric what was happening with the Marquis, since his daughter and servants were plotting something. It turns out the Duke was dragging Reynold behind him, as if he were a balloon using magic. Cedric also asked not to worry about Gerald, as they had dealt with her too. And when they advanced a little further, a pleasant surprise awaited the princess. After avoiding other bushes, she saw her dad, who was also looking for her. Elia was stunned, not understanding how Duke Calvados had gotten there. But happily, like a child, she ran into her father's arms, almost crying with relief. He only apologized to his daughter for arriving so late. Elia suspected that Duke Marinist also followed the magic trail like them. But now everything is fine, and she was even glad she convinced Cedric to go to the capital. At that moment, Calvados paid attention to her and Cedric. His gaze was severe, and he even scolded them for being shameless. He clearly thought they had done something wrong with his daughter, and he was going to finish them. He started activating his magic, while Cedric begged Elia to hide behind him. But she started begging Duke Marinus to listen to them. But he was not going to do it. He was sure they would try to blame others. It is clear that due to concern for Daphne, he is not thinking rationally. And as a father, he won't let it go. Elia thought about how to calm this man now, to then be able to explain everything properly to him. But then Daphne intervened, grabbing her father by the face. She drew his attention to herself and asked him to stop making a fuss. Cedric and Elia were in shock, but they supposed this was for the best, and the girl begged her father not to attack the Indigenia Dukes. Then she confessed that it wasn't them who kidnapped her, and that actually, Marquis Babylon is behind everything. Calvados discovered that the Marquis was also planning to blame the Indigenia for the kidnapping. The girl told how she managed to escape and that she fell off a cliff, and these people saved her. Then she asked them to explain why her father trusts Babylon so blindly, he being the main villain. Elia was also curious, since in the original novel there was no information about this, but she understood well the reason why Calvados doesn't believe them, noticing that Cedric barely contained his anger. At that moment, little Caleb appeared in their clearing bathed in the setting sun's rays. Elia was happy that this boy finally showed up and started asking where he had been. But Caleb addressed Calvados, declaring that he knew the reason for his actions. The Marinus Duke and his daughter didn't understand at first what this boy was talking about, and Elia got scared by how her little friend's voice sounded now. With an expression of fury on his face, the young Duke demanded answers from Calvados about his questions. Caleb understood that the situation was out of the ordinary, but he couldn't ignore that a member of the indigent's family was a suspect in the kidnapping. And approaching, the boy declared that he would report Duke Marinist for this incident. Calvados, however, now understood the situation and admitted that he had rushed things. After Cedric was affected by the curse, the relationship between their families was superficial. Calvados thought they would want revenge. That's why he believed the Marquis's words. Cedric decided that this was the moment the Babylons would justify themselves. He snapped his fingers, and Reynold fell heavily to the ground with his whole body. Next to him, Ural was also on the ground, and both looked terribly scared. But furious, the Marquis claimed he could explain everything, but only after the gravity magic was lifted. He just wanted to get off the ground and straighten up at once. But Caleb accused him of a horrendous crime against the princess and her family. This is called treason, and the Marquis's family will be judged by the aristocratic court. At that instant, the Knights of the Golden Lion appeared out of nowhere and demanded explanations from Calvados. Elia internally begged for everything to end right there, but Gerald interrupted her with a lament, begging for mercy. And if Elia didn't know the atrocities this woman had committed before, maybe. But she felt not an ounce of pity for those villains and turned away silently. Then Daphne turned to her, aware that she still hadn't thanked Elia for saving her. She also asked if the future Duchess was injured, but she assured her she was fine. Then, a little quieter, Daphne confessed that she wanted to ask that girl for something. Elia felt curious and gladly agreed. It turns out the princess wanted to call her savior little sister, and now she asked for permission to do so. For Elia herself, it was quite unexpected, but she nodded as she also liked the idea. After this, they were going to return to the dukedom using Cedric's magic. And Daphne became a little sad, realizing she wanted to spend more time with that girl. She will never forget how she jumped after her, because not everyone would risk themselves like that for a stranger. Moreover, Elia smiled sweetly at her, happy that she was well. The girl wanted to get closer to that lady, but she cannot be more intimate than the indigent's family. At that moment, Cedric approached her and called Elia. He also addressed Princess Marinist, relieved that she was well, and knelt before her, demonstrating his respect for the little one. Then, Daphne mustered the courage to tell Mr. Cedric something. But secretly, she whispered in his ear, while Elia was dying of curiosity. Cedric was quite surprised, and Daphne added that it would be very useful information. They said goodbye, and Elia tried to extract from him what the little princess had told the Duke. But Cedric wouldn't give anything away, and that started to worry the young woman. Then he stopped, looked her in the eyes, and begged her never to act alone again. The young woman knew that acting on her own would be a violation of the contract. She didn't understand that Cedric simply didn't want to put her in danger, and he skillfully changed the subject, suggesting they wait for Caleb, who had vanished. The boy, meanwhile, watched the princess, grumbling that he didn't like any of this. When they returned to the dukedom, it was already late, and Elias went out onto the balcony. She remembered the amount of things that had happened today, and she didn't understand why so many characters revolved around her. But on the other hand, she was glad Daphne was safe, and she no longer had to worry about her. Then, Elia felt she was starting to get sleepy, and was about to go to bed, when Cedric unexpectedly decided to meet with her. He apologized for his untimely visit at this hour, but he needed to talk to her. Not understanding what could be so urgent, Elia assured him that she hadn't been bothered, and the Duke asked how she was feeling, which was a bit strange because she was fine. Just a little tired, but she liked Cedric's attention. And smiling sweetly, she thanked him for his concern. Then she confessed that she couldn't sleep and kept looking at the moon. Then she invited him inside. Together they went out onto the balcony and admired the night sky for a while, watching how stars fell occasionally. And from time to time, Cedric looked at Elia, admitting that the moon was truly very beautiful. This made the girl happy, because since she arrived in this place, she often looks at the night sky, and she never tires of admiring its beauty. And then Cedric declared that, due to the situation, they should get married as soon as possible. The Duke explained to his fiancée that the Babylonians would soon disappear from the dukedom, and that the Marquis has influence. And of course, his followers would suffer the same fate, leaving the dukedom almost certain. Elia was curious to know what would happen to Marquis Babylon. It is obvious that, for his crimes, he will hardly escape the death penalty. This worried her a little, but she trusted it wouldn't directly affect her. While adjusting her hair, Cedric noticed a scratch on her hand and asked her when she had hurt herself. It surely happened in the forest, but the Duke's face still showed concern. The girl insisted it was just a scratch and that she was perfectly fine. Suddenly, Cedric apologized to her. Since his arrival, dangerous things have not stopped happening, and he was frustrated not being able to protect her better. His expression was so serious at that moment that Elia felt the desire to see his smile. And with her fingers, she touched the corners of his mouth and stretched the skin sideways. She laughed herself, but explained to Cedric that a smile suits him much better. Moreover, she assured him that he shouldn't apologize, because all this is the result of his decisions. To top it off, she was the first to say they should save Daphne, and Cedric only agreed. Seeing her confusion, Elia promised him that from now on only good things would happen to them. The boy sighed in relief and thanked his fiancée for her warm words, because as he thought, she turned out to be a good person, no matter what they said about her. And since it was late, it was colder, and Elia suggested they go back inside. Cedric also noticed they had been distracted talking and praised her again for today's work. And when he called her a good person again, suddenly Elia got a lump in her throat. She didn't forget that she was the cause of his curse, and only in her mind could she apologize for it. She wished to confess that she wasn't the person he thought she was. Elia realized she had deviated a bit from the main goal of freeing Cedric from the curse. Meanwhile, somewhere else, which looked very gloomy due to the time of day, a lady with blue hair was informed about the future Duchess Elia. The servant who brought the news was clearly afraid that her mistress's anger would fall upon her, but she dismissed her and remained thinking about the fiancé of Duke Indigens. She was the Empress, and for some reason she didn't like the name she heard today. A few days later, the verdict on the kidnappers of Lady Marinist was dictated. The entire family was executed, and the Marquis's head was exhibited for all to see. Elia was glad they returned quickly to the dukedom and didn't have to see it with their own eyes. Now that Marquis Babylonia's influence was gone, she and Cedric could prepare the wedding in peace. During this time, many things changed in the dukedom. Elia made some aristocratic friends who admired her appearance. They wanted to help her with the wedding preparations, but first they asked to chat a bit over tea. However, the future duchess had her own plans, and they agreed to meet another time. Mainly, Olivia helped Elia, and they became very good friends. The behavior of the vassals also changed, who were previously negative about the wedding. Now they behave differently. They are even eager for the wedding to take place soon. Furthermore, many gazes that previously criticized Caleb disappeared. It seems the reason for their contempt was that they were receiving bribes from Reynold. The girl was infuriated by this sudden change in attitude, but she was glad that everything ended well. The wedding preparations were soon completed, and now they could spend their days peacefully. Elia herself couldn't get Cedric's words out of her head about her being a good person. The thoughts assaulted her because she had nothing to do and decided to prepare something for Cedric. Very soon the girl appeared before the brothers with a tray. She had prepared a small snack and suggested they all sit together for tea. Cedric liked her concern, but didn't want her to exert herself too much. Elia, as usual, assured him that it hadn't tired her, especially since she herself wanted to prepare something delicious. Caleb, for his part, didn't oppose a gift from his favorite and immediately took a cookie to try it. The girl loved seeing the boy enjoy the food and was happy that Cedric liked it too. The Duke was a little surprised, not understanding how she knew what he felt, and she explained that everything was written on his face. Because when he tastes something she prepared, his expression instantly becomes happy and peaceful. Cedric was still a bit surprised. Elia has known him for a short time, but she has managed to see in him things that even he himself doesn't know. This girl seemed more and more like an enigma to him, and he fervently wished to solve it. When they sat down at the tea table, Elia was informed that a madame from the salon had arrived. She has to try on the wedding dresses that arrived sooner than expected. Caleb wanted to go with Elia, but she reminded him that he had his administration class at that moment. This disconcerted the boy a bit, but he didn't argue. It's not that he didn't want to go to class. It's just that time flies when he is with Elia. She suggested spending time after classes, and Caleb's mood improved. She loved that this boy could behave like a child. Elia went to try on the wedding dress with Cedric. At the same time, she felt more clearly that the day of her wedding with Duke Indigentia was approaching. It seemed unreal to her that she was marrying such a handsome man. Furthermore, the wedding ceremony was being planned on such a scale, as if it were a royal ball. Suddenly, Cedric asked how Elia was feeling at that moment. He wanted to know if she felt depressed, and that question seemed strange to her. But then he remembered something similar. She said the last time she tried on a dress. Although it is normal, some brides feel overwhelmed before the wedding. The lady of the salon told this to Cedric, so he understood that his fiancée also felt this way. Because normally weddings are in a shabby hall or girls marry someone they don't love. Or perhaps they don't like their appearance. That's why some brides get nervous. Elia realized that Cedric cared that she liked everything. Apparently for that reason, he decided to ask carefully what it was that she didn't like. The Duke stared into Elia's eyes and asked her again how she felt at that moment. And she shouted happily that she liked everything, hoping the interrogation would end there. She was truly happy, but the Duke wanted to be completely sure that nothing was overwhelming her. Suddenly, she blurted out that he was very handsome. She knew she had said it without thinking, but it was true, although now she felt uncomfortable. Cedric, for his part, reacted with total calm, even thanking his fiancée for her sincerity. But his questions didn't end there. There was still something he wanted to know. And to avoid impulsive answers, Elia asked him to go see the madame himself. Since she had to go with Olivia, she immediately ran off, before Cedric could say another word. Now she found it difficult to look him in the face, and felt she was starting to blush a lot. The Duke, alone, remembered what Lady Marinus had told him in the forest. According to her, Elia really likes people with a nice smile. It was an unexpected confession for Cedric, but now he understood what Daphne meant. Recalling how Elia said that the smile suited him very well, he realized he was too serious. Now this started to worry him a lot, and all those words wouldn't leave his head. He also realized that his fiancée thought his smile was very beautiful. And in that thoughtful state, his assistant Edwin found him with some documents. He noticed that the Duke had been acting strange lately and wanted to know what was troubling him so much. However, whatever Cedric did, every word of his fiancée echoed in his ears. Then he went to see Madame Angela, who was surprised that he came alone. The Duke explained that Lady Aaliyah would come later, and the salon owner agreed to wait for her. But she also noticed that something worried the young lord, and she declared that his fiancé would never feel depressed because he was very handsome. Angela overheard their conversation by chance. The door was open. Angela has plenty of experience taking care of the indigent's family's dress. Even if she is a commoner, few aristocrats resist buying something from her. Moreover, she loved working for the Duke. This way, she would know more about Ilya. She is a normal girl, but that handsome man noticed her. What joy! The dress fitting was quiet in the end, and Ilya could relax. Olivia wouldn't stop praising how beautiful she would look at the wedding and her good taste. But Cedric's tuxedo fitting was missing, and she burned to see him. They tried on the clothes separately. The groom cannot see the dress beforehand. She could see her fiancé, but she asked Olivia for today's list. It turns out that after trying on the suits, Cedric and she had to go inspect the bridal chamber. Hearing that, Ilya almost choked on her tea. She had completely forgotten about it. That marriage is not just friendly relations. And she became very uneasy imagining they would go to that room together. Their marriage is by contract, of course, but they must appear like a real marriage to others. And now, additionally, they will have to live together in the same room. At that moment, Cedric entered the room with his shirt unbuttoned, and Ilya became even more nervous. He only heard his fiancée coughing and ran to see if she was all right. That's why he hadn't buttoned up in time. Olivia explained that the young lady had only choked, and Cedric calmed down a bit. Then they asked him to return to the fitting room, since Ilya was fine. Olivia also begged him to finish the fitting soon, as they still had to check the bridal chamber. Hearing this, the Duke was a little stunned. He had forgotten too. And Ilya felt so uncomfortable again that she even covered her face with her hands. For a brief instant, silence fell in the room. Even the maid was silent. Just then, Mrs. Angela approached laughing, understanding why these two were so embarrassed. Furthermore, she paid attention to Ilya and noticed that everything was very different from the rumors. These two actually seem like a very sweet pair of future spouses. After some time, the fitting for the wedding outfits was completely finished. This moment seemed very interesting to Angela, as Cedric and Ilya were doing it together. For an instant, she cast an enigmatic look at the bride, and she confessed to being very nervous, as she heard that Cedric will marry a girl he likes very much. Then, the lady asked permission to ask them something. She was very interested to know what made Miss Ilya fall in love with Mr. Cedric. The question took her by surprise, leaving her speechless, not knowing what to say. Stuttering a little, she began to explain that he is kind and has a great appearance. Then, a similar question was directed at Mr. Cedric. He liked that Aaliyah worried about others first and tried to do everything to understand them. Also that she approaches others without hesitation, and Cedric believes there is nothing more beautiful. When he saw that behavior from Ilya, little by little he fell in love with her. This greatly pleased Mrs. Angela, and Ilya was starting to get nervous, thinking her fiancé was overacting. And that made her uncomfortable. Meanwhile, she glanced at his face, which at that moment looked so sweet and carefree. Ilya noticed again that lately the Duke had changed a lot. And after saying goodbye to Madame, they went to inspect the bridal chamber. Then, his assistant approached the Lord and asked how everything went. Cedric didn't want to give him explanations and dryly clarified that everything was fine. But Edwin was glad. That meant his hard work had been worth it. Now he came to inform Cedric about the task he had assigned him earlier. The Duke had even forgotten a little, and Edwin reminded him that it was about the investigation into Ilya's case. Then, lowering his head in guilt, he reported that this time too he had failed to find information, despite interrogating every village near Miss Aaliyah's cabin. This bothered the Duke a little, but strangely, he wasn't very affected, and Edwin added that she is not a common person, or they would have discovered something already. Cedric suddenly asked the assistant not to overstep his comments. The assistant apologized for taking the liberty of saying something like that. Even so, Cedric didn't scold him, but asked him to continue investigating. He wanted to know something about her. That woman sometimes drove him crazy. She seemed so simple, but at the same time hid something. Ilya, meanwhile, felt bored from having nothing to do. Everyone else was busy, and she wandered aimlessly through the hallways. Passing by a room, she heard Caleb's voice, who was clearly talking about her. The door was ajar, and curiosity forced the girl to spy on the boy's conversation. It turned out he was completely alone in the room. His face was very serious, and in his hands he held the notebook he always carried with him. Every day, the little Duke wrote something in that notebook. At that moment, Caleb stated that one could not believe in something and that he himself was going to investigate. Elia was horrified to realize that this boy was investigating her, and she was terrified that the young Duke might discover that she was actually a fairy. Above all, he was going to keep investigating her, and she terribly feared he would find out. Then, Caleb left the room, and Elia hid behind the door so he wouldn't see her. When he disappeared around the corner, the girl decided to check his notebook, which he had left on the table. She didn't want to spy on others' notes, but the situation was such that she had no choice. Closing her eyes before looking at the pages, Elia prayed she was mistaken. And the first thing she read was that Caleb had managed for her not to be on a diet. But he was worried that she would go on a diet again, as the wedding was soon. The boy didn't want her to lose weight and planned to make sure she kept eating her dessert. Elia had indeed decided to control her weight, but she realized that Cedric and Caleb wouldn't allow it. Flipping through other pages, the girl became convinced that the boy suspected nothing about her. That made him even more adorable, and she decided to hug him dearly when they met. Then she read the part about when the three of them cooked together, and also about when the three of them watched the stars, which brought back memories. From Elia's notes, she knew that the boy had been having a great time lately. She was glad her brother seemed more cheerful and the dukedom livelier. But Caleb was saddened that, when Elia broke his brother's curse, their marriage would end. That meant they would have to separate, and he didn't want her to leave the dukedom. Elia understood that too, but hoped everything would turn out well in the end. The rest of the time flew by, and soon the wedding day arrived. Daphne Marinist was, of course, invited to the ceremony, and she seemed the happiest of all. Even from afar, she noticed that the dukedom now looked very beautiful, and she was eager to see what the ceremony hall looked like, knowing they had decorated it like royalty. But her father, Calvados, was a bit embarrassed that everything hadn't gone as planned. After Marquis Babylon was presented to the court, the Indigentia family made it public. Consequently, past matters, forgotten by everyone, resurfaced strongly. The fact that Daphne Marinist caused the curse transfer to Cedric fueled the rumors. But since the issue directly involves the imperial family, no one spoke lightly. People couldn't believe that Cedric was helping Calvados after what happened, since he didn't even receive compensation after the incident, and gossip about both families spread. Gossipers began devouring the local newspaper to keep up with everything. The demand grew so much that they opened a branch in the capital and received compensation. Half the money went to the wedding hall, and Calvado felt guilty. It wasn't easy for him to attend the ceremony, knowing he would be ashamed to look them in the face. But Daphne received an invitation and wanted to participate, so the Duke accompanied her. Although the girl's mood wasn't always so cheerful, Daphne remembered that night in the forest. When Caleb bluntly told her she was insensitive, the girl didn't quite understand why he treated her that way, and reminded him that such a tone was unacceptable for an archduke. Then she asked for explanations. The boy just continued looking at her fixedly with fury. Then, rudely, even with hatred in his voice, he declared that because of her, his brother now had a curse. He knew that Daphne and her father were happy that the prince was safe. But Caleb still couldn't accept that. Because of that, his brother could now die. Then, more gently, the boy admitted that with Elia's arrival, Cedric had a chance to enter the Temple of Knowledge. He will marry her and then find out how to break that curse. This made Caleb happy, but it infuriated him that Daphne tried to get close to Elia after all. The girl explained that Elia herself decided to save her, but Caleb declared that she couldn't have acted differently and even blamed the princess for falling off the cliff. And since Daphne cursed the man Elia loves, it is unlikely she saved the girl of her own free will. These memories overwhelmed the princess so much that her father noticed. The boy warned her that they invited her only because malicious rumors could arise. Caleb also begged her not to get her hopes up, but she didn't want to believe his words. The girl wanted to apologize to all of them after what happened, but everyone quickly dispersed. And now she has a chance, because Daphne doesn't want Elia to hate her. Elia was very nervous, as the pearl dress felt terribly heavy. Olivia didn't know what else to do. She had already removed almost all the pearls, but the young lady was still so nervous that she feared she wouldn't be able to get married. However, seeing the maid's panicked face, she clarified that she said it without thinking. Just then, Edwin, the assistant, appeared and proudly declared that he understood how difficult it was for Lady Elia. So he asked the Archduke for help. It was then that the young woman noticed that Caleb was standing next to the assistant. Edwin proposed using gravity magic so the dress wouldn't feel so heavy. Olivia and Angela loved the idea. Elia tried to protest. She was still nervous, but Caleb was already about to start the spell. But despite all the nervousness, everyone hoped this wedding would go well. Cedric, dressed up, was already in the hall waiting for the ceremony to begin, and Aaliyah agreed to use gravity magic. And when everything was ready, she was glad that nothing was pulling downwards, and she felt lightness. And although using magic at a wedding seemed a bit strange to her, she was very comfortable now. The girl thanked Kali for helping, and he was happy to have been able to do something for Aaliyah. Now she can marry Cedric peacefully. But suddenly, the boy became serious and addressed Elia. Taking her hand, he declared that if his brother caused her trouble in the future, he would scold him. The girl understood that Caleb was only worried about her, but appreciated his sincerity. After that, they were happy that the three of them could live eternally in the ducal castle. The topic of eternity worried Elia, but she thought he was just saying it because all eyes were on them, and she decided to play along. Smiling sweetly, the girl declared that they would truly live together forever and ever. After this, it was time to head to the ceremony itself. Duke Cedric, waiting for his fiancée, stood in the hall, noticing the guests' gazes. He even felt a little uncomfortable that everyone started staring at him like that. Simply, the girls couldn't take their eyes off him, confirming he was truly handsome. The aristocrats didn't believe he was really getting married, but they had read it in the newspaper. So it was true. Other ladies feared approaching him because of the curse, however. A commoner is not afraid. Very soon, the assistant Edwin announced the arrival of Elias's fiancée. The young woman, in a pompous dress, advanced escorted by a small Caleb, with a proud face. Seeing his fiancée, Cedric froze in astonishment. She looked incredibly beautiful. The guests gasped, but did not break the silence, silently admiring the lady in her bridal attire. The Duke noticed that, at that moment, she really looked like a fairy. And when she approached, he felt a little strange, as if he were slightly nervous. But Caleb's satisfied gaze implied that everything would turn out wonderfully. Then Cedric approached his fiancée and looked into her eyes with great tenderness. She pronounced that they were finally getting married and let out a cheerful laugh. But then she noticed the strange expression on the groom's face and worried, not understanding what could trouble him. The Duke understood that he had gotten lost in reality, but he composed himself and smiled at her. Cedric thanked him in his favor, but she had her mind elsewhere. After the wedding, she will be able to enter the Temple of Knowledge and recover lost memories. This way, she will free Cedric from the curse, and he and his brother can live happily. Then they turned towards the altar, where the priest waited patiently for them, and the young woman felt blessed for the time she had spent in the dukedom. She was relieved to have managed to get this far without being discovered. Few by a close call. Now she hoped to be able to correct the mistake she herself had made in the past. At that instant, while she was thinking, Cedric believed Elia was suffering from something. But Edwin's voice echoed, announcing that the bride and groom were taking their first steps towards a new life. In the middle of the ceremony, Cedric and Elia decided to skip some formalities to speed things up. Afterward, Cedric asked her if she was okay, admitting he noticed her confusion. Elia explained that the long, welcoming speech had simply exhausted her. This reassured the Duke. Then she suggested getting rid of the curse as soon as possible. After that, they can eat something delicious, and Cedric loved that idea. Preparing for the next step, they suddenly noticed someone whose face was hidden in the shadows. Elia didn't know who it was and thought it was a late guest, but the Duke recognized the guy. Caleb, upon seeing the appearance of another person, also became alert. The unexpected guest who appeared at their wedding turned out to be a servant of Her Highness the Empress. This seemed strange to Elia, since the imperial palace had declared they would not attend the wedding. And looking at that man, the young woman felt a bad premonition. The servant conveyed the Empress's congratulations on the union of Duke Cedric and Lady Elia. He also conveyed her regrets for not being able to attend the wedding ceremony in person. And furthermore, he reported that traces of an intruder had been discovered in the Temple of Knowledge. However, this individual was not recognized by the imperial family, and in order to find him, the imperial palace decided to temporarily close the Temple of Knowledge. The guests who heard all this were in shock, not understanding why they were saying this right now. as if they wanted to let them know on purpose, and Aaliyah thought the same. Because everyone knows how important this marriage is for Cedric to find out how to get rid of the curse. And the decision to close the temple means the Empress is watching his curse. Surely she doesn't like that someone might take her place. That means she hates the indigent's family. At the time of the curse, the imperial family ignored Cedric's protests, which implies they despise him. Immediately after, the Empress's servant announced that they could continue with the ceremony. But the atmosphere was already ruined, and Elia decided she wasn't going to let it go just like that. The girl tried to approach the servant to clarify everything, but she tripped and Cedric barely managed to hold her. And the guests thought she was so shocked on such an important day that she had trouble walking. In reality, Elia simply rushed, but in any case, that man had already left. Later, Cedric learned from his assistant that the Empress's servant had returned to the palace. Edwin himself was so furious that he wanted to catch that wretch and teach him a lesson. The Duke asked his assistant to calm down, although he himself wouldn't refuse to chat with that guy. Then, Edwin asked Cedric to pay more attention to Lady Elia. After thinking about it for a bit, the Duke accepted that his assistant was right. After all, she suffered a shock. When Edwin was left alone, it seemed to him that the young lord hesitated, and Cedric remembered on the way that Elia, after that news, acted as if nothing was wrong. However, he couldn't hide the expression on his face at that fateful moment. The Duke himself understood that, after going through something like that, one cannot be well. He saw that his wife was worried and wanted to do something to make her feel comfortable. At the same time, he feared that after everything that happened, Elia would want to leave the dukedom immediately. And when he went to the room where she was, he was slightly surprised by what he saw. The girl was sitting at a table full of food, eating heartily. Caleb and Daphne were sitting next to her, like a support group, showering her with sweets. Then, Cedric saw Olivia and the chef, who were absolutely dedicated to the young lady. The Duke stood there, perplexed, not quite understanding what the hell was going on. Elia herself was very happy to see Cedric enter and wanted to chat with him. Her mood seemed completely normal, as if she hadn't received horrible news. The girl convinced the Duke to go for a walk in the garden, where they could chat quietly. Under the sun's rays, in the open air, both felt a certain relief, as if they were breathing. Elia first praised the servants who took care of her, even if they were a bit clumsy. The truth is, she also understood Cedric's concern and begged him not to get so anxious. Please. But he couldn't help but worry and hoped that girl would never leave them forever. That's when he understood that he was being too selfish. Suddenly, Elia stopped dead, as if remembering something crucial, asking her husband to wait. In a jiffy, she braided a flower crown and adorned Cedric's head with it. The Duke blushed a little, while Elia was happy like a child, saying it suited him very well. Explaining that his face looked like a gloomy cloud, the young woman wanted to lighten the mood a bit. Of course, they understood that obstacles had been placed before them, because they were so close to breaking the curse. However, Elia continues to take care of Cedric no matter what. And he realized that he wasn't even thinking about the fact that he would soon enter the temple to find a way to get rid of the misfortune. The Duke only thought about the moment when that girl would leave his family and stop being close. But he knew that the end of this relationship was inevitable, even though his heart shudders because of it. His thoughts were interrupted by Aaliyah, asking what she knew about laurel wreaths. She had heard that in distant lands, there was a custom of rewarding marathon winners with laurels. This meant the victor had gone through a hard road, and she explained that Cedric also seemed to be running a marathon. She believed he would arrive safe and sound in the end, and after breaking the curse, he would get his laurel wreath. The Duke felt a certain discomfort again. After all, he had gone to comfort Elia, but in the end, it was she who comforted him again. Then he sincerely thanked her for her concern, admitting that he himself should be comforting her right now. He understood that the wedding was an important celebration, and that she was nervous. As always, Aaliyah assured him she had a great time, as it was unlikely she would have such a wedding again in her life. Adding that she didn't plan to look for another man afterward, she understood that after Cedric, she couldn't give her heart to anyone else. Her words sounded comforting, although the Duke was worried deep down. Later, Aaliyah asked who the person who entered the Temple of Knowledge could be. But Cedric suspected that criminal would never be found, because such a person doesn't exist. Or they might say he died instantly and the corpse was burned, so the identity cannot be established. The Temple of Knowledge is a place where everything that happens is recorded, and it is actually a dragon's lair. That's why no one enters there. They say the emperor once managed to become friends with it. But in the original novel, Daphne befriended the dragon, and Elia would also want to connect with it. At the same time, she understood that the imperial family couldn't stop them forever. Cedric agreed, but explained it was a kind of warning. So that everyone would stay away from the indigent's family, Elia looked at her husband with regret. She didn't want him to despair and give up halfway. And it infuriated her that those idiots wouldn't stop and couldn't leave the Duke in peace. She even imagined putting the Empress's own portrait on her head. But then she tried to calm down, as she had to think about the solution to the problem that had arisen. She knew that the path to the Temple of Knowledge they had chosen was not the only one. In the attic of Daphne's dukedom, there is a teleporter that she used in the original story to go to the temple. She went unnoticed and also managed to befriend the dragon. But only Daphne knows that secret, and if Aaliyah says she knows the truth, she will be suspicious. Even more so, if it is discovered that there is a secret path to the temple, the Marinist family could be in danger. Elia was going crazy from not being able to recover her memories. That would make things much easier. Then, while walking with the Duke, she remembered that tomorrow is the loyalty oath ceremony to the family. Elia wanted to think about how to prepare, but Cedric suggested simply returning to the castle and rest. Especially Elia needs rest, as she will soon have to show herself to people again. Suddenly, she realized she didn't know how a duchess's wife should behave in front of guests. Cedric asked her not to worry, as they have the power to influence public opinion anyway. This can be achieved with the help of the newspaper. Cedric didn't want her to receive pity, but he believed they should take advantage of it while they could. Elia remembered the incidents that had happened to them again and didn't understand why misfortune plagued this family. And then she proposed showing everyone how disappointed they were about not being able to go to the temple. To do this, they should cancel the honeymoon. And Cedric agreed with the idea, but he didn't want to cancel the honeymoon. They had waited for it for a long time. They were supposed to go to a famous resort, the most popular of all. Above all, it would show everyone that Cedric and Elia married for love. But the girl felt it wouldn't look good to travel after what happened. She felt it was more correct to show everyone their despair. Elia understood it was disappointing, but it would be better for the indigent's family. The Duke didn't rush to respond to her proposal, and he felt that the cancellation of the honeymoon worried her a lot. Elia believed her decision was correct, but now she felt uncomfortable because of Cedric's mood. But he assured her that everything was fine and that he also thought they should stick to their plan. The girl was very pleased that her husband agreed, but doubted he was eagerly awaiting the honeymoon. And while she was thinking about it, Cedric asked her to promise him something. Since they cannot go on their honeymoon right now, Cedric asked her if they could go on vacation together after visiting the Temple of Knowledge. In other words, they will have their honeymoon a little later. Elia was perplexed by such a request. She didn't quite understand why they should do that, especially since she thought that, after visiting the Temple of Knowledge, they could lift the Duke's curse. And if everything goes well, they will divorce as agreed. So traveling makes no sense. And trying to convince Elia to agree, Cedric explained that it would be easier for them to manipulate society that way. And it sounded quite convincing. Cedric confessed that in the past, he was an orphan taken in by a noble family. And while attending successor classes, he renounced the title of legitimate heir. After that, he was cursed, and although he received no compensation, he accepted his final fate. Cedric continued to work diligently so that his younger brother would become a great duke. And now, he finally found love and got married, and thanks to her, he will be able to break the curse. So if he can enjoy his honeymoon after removing the curse from his beloved, he will be able to restore his reputation. And Elia remembers that there are always incidents around the Duke, and she thought that if it helps Cedric and Caleb, it wouldn't be so bad to have a small honeymoon. Then, with a satisfied smile on his face, she agreed to travel later. This greatly pleased Cedric. He even felt like a huge weight had been lifted off him. In the end, the wedding proceeded without incident, despite Elia's worries. Several guests left early, but others stayed for the evening banquet. People enjoyed the food and congratulated the newlyweds. Later, Caleb approached Elia and asked if she was tired from the day. The girl thanked him for his concern and admitted she had rested well. But the boy wasn't leaving, he had something else to tell her. However, he hesitated about how to start, and Elia worried about the little Duke. Suddenly, he blurted out that he was going to rest and would tell her later. Elia wanted to catch him, but some aristocrats intercepted her to congratulate her again. Those ladies loved her amazing dress, but Elia's attention was fixed on Caleb, who had vanished the instant she turned around. So she decided that, without fail, she would talk to him later. And late into the night, the girl felt like a living dead. She was completely exhausted. In a single evening, she had to socialize with more people than she had met in her entire past life. But what gnawed at her the most was, what the heck did Caleb want to tell her? Seizing a moment, Elia went to look for him, but the maids told her that the boy was already asleep. Now she was so frustrated that Olivia began to worry greatly. Then she reminded her that today was her first wedding night. And for the first time, she begged her mistress not to relax and to pull herself together, despite the fatigue. The previous time, just thinking about sharing a room with Cedric made Elia almost choke. But now she couldn't even think. She felt like she would collapse as soon as she touched the bed. Even if she had the energy, Elia was sure she would blush a little and nothing would happen. Just then, Olivia asked her lady not to worry about anything, that she would prepare everything. Elia felt curious about what Cedric would think. He had also been through a lot today, and surely he was already asleep. In reality, the Duke was in his room and very nervous. He knew nothing would happen, that they would just share the room, but that didn't put him at ease. The situation is complicated for him, but he can be understood. Cedric himself, to calm down a bit, decided to drink more cold water, believing it would help him. Meanwhile, Caleb had already sunk into a deep sleep, and at that moment, something sinister began to form under his bed, something the boy didn't even suspect. The night was silent, and a full moon illuminated the dukedom. Just when Cedric thought he could finally relax, he heard Elia's voice. The girl apologized for arriving a bit late, but the Duke assured her it was all right. He noticed they had similar pajamas, and Elia explained that Olivia had taken care of that. But both spouses seemed tired, and decided that the best thing would be to go to sleep early. Cedric gave his spot on the bed to Elia, while he prepared to sleep on the sofa. But the girl thought it would be uncomfortable there, and that he should also lie down on the soft bed, especially since it is wide enough and they can fit there, without bothering each other. Elia was the first to lie down, and her body seemed to melt instantly into a relaxed state. Before falling asleep, she thought that the fate they were preparing for had turned into chaos. And the visit to the temple is now postponed. Tomorrow the girl's life will continue in this palace, and she asked Cedric to take care of her. And he, seeing his tired wife's eyelids closing, promised he would do everything right. Very quickly, Elia fell asleep as they expected, but the Duke suddenly lost sleep. Still, he was pleased that his beloved was by his side. He carefully moved a lock of her hair so it wouldn't cover her eye. In that state, Elia looked as if she carried a very heavy burden. After a while, Elia heard a noise, similar to the sound of an ambulance siren. If a moment ago she was with Cedric, how is it that she returned to her past body? And the doctors came. Her brother Junji felt very unwell. After examining him, the doctors decided he was albino, but the girl stated that he resembled her. Due to an attack, the boy's hair and eye color changed. But again, she heard someone call her Elia. And upon opening her eyes, she understood it was a dream. She saw a very worried Duke in front of her, frightened that something had happened to her. Upon sitting up, the girl didn't even understand instantly where she was, and then felt a strong dizziness. And if Cedric hadn't held her, she would have fainted again. At that moment, a maid knocked on the door with an agitated voice, explaining that something terrible had happened to the young master. Both spouses rushed to the boys' room. Especially fast ran Aaliyah. It seemed to her that she was still dreaming and running to help her brother. When she rushed into the room, the maids were surrounding the boy's bed. Someone was yelling to bring warm water, and Elia got scared, not understanding what was wrong with Caleb. They had already called the doctor, but he hadn't arrived yet, and the maids didn't know what to do. The boy was in bed. It seemed he was still sleeping, but he was writhing as if convulsing and groaning with difficulty. Elia remained as if in a trance, thinking it was June, and reproached herself for leaving him alone for a second. But then Cedric hugged her, asking her to calm down and promising he would stay with Caleb. However, the girl seemed not to hear him. It seemed to her that he was a stranger to her. She felt alone without Dad and Mom. Cedric kept stroking her face to get her to react, and his care began to pay off. Elia fully returned to this reality and recognized her husband. Then she thanked him for bringing her back, although she still felt slightly dizzy. But she decided to test Caleb. She didn't even listen to the maid. The young woman hugged the boy, and in her arms, he began to calm down a bit. Holding him tightly, Elia whispered to him that everything would be fine and asked him to calm down. She remembered how she calmed Junji when he had attacks, and did the same with Caleb. The girl rocked him gently in her arms, as if lulling him, and kept whispering that everything would be all right. And shortly after, the boy opened his eyes and realized that Aaliyah was in front of him, who was immediately happy that his attack was over, and now everything would be fine with him. The maids watched the scene as if mesmerized. Cedric also dared not say a word for now, but he was glad his brother was better, although he was worried that Ilya would occasionally repeat Yuni's name. And he remembered her confession. Seeing Caleb, her memories were slowly returning. The girl said he looked a lot like someone who was very important to her. Now Cedric suspected that the man Ilya was talking about was named Yuni. And while everyone was busy with Caleb's problem, no one noticed something gruesome hanging from the ceiling. That evil was hiding behind the lamp, and only if you looked closely could you see its sinister grin. Later, Cedric returned to his room. That night, he was supposed to stay alone. Ilya wanted to stay with Caleb, so he would be calmer. The girl didn't want the Duke to see her brother's attacks, explaining that she was already used to dealing with that. Cedric understood that Caleb and Junji had merged for Aaliyah, and that she was taking care of someone named Junji. He hoped her memory would return, but it seemed more like an unconscious action. Furthermore, if Aaliyah remembered, she would look for Junji, just when the Duke thought he probably wasn't in this world anymore. That's why Aaliyah pours her love into Caleb, as they are so similar. At that moment, Cedric noticed that he had stopped feeling her touch, and understood that the effect of the curse was intensifying. Aaliyah remained by Caleb's side until morning, until the sun illuminated the entire room. During the night, the boy had no more attacks, and that pleased the girl. But then she remembered that she had sent Cedric to another room, and she worried that he would be distressed. She herself didn't expect to see her brother in Caleb again. In her past life, misfortune struck her family suddenly. Her parents died, and the insurance money was stolen, and she was left with only 10 million won. With it, she rented a room and stayed with Junny, hoping the coach would help her. The girl believed the only way to support her brother was to become a medalist. Fortunately, since childhood she was called a prodigy, but to win she had to leave Junny, 2 years old, with the owner. She moved away from him, as she found it difficult to take care of even herself. And her coach suggested taking her brother to the gym, but she thought she couldn't be indebted to the boss. She also didn't want to reveal her family situation to her friends. But one day she returned after training and saw that Junji was having an attack. This happened while the aunt was absent, and in this terrible situation, the girl had only one thought. It seemed to her that if her brother left, she would be left alone, and now those thoughts seemed crazy to her, because she was worried about being left alone while her brother had an attack. Under the bright light, Junji looked different. His hair turned white, and his light brown eyes turned red. It was a strange illness. It eliminated pigments from the body, and had not yet been declared by the scientific community. However, it leads to death by exhaustion. And now Ilya thought that the reason for her reincarnation in this world was an opportunity to atone for her guilt. Later, the Duke was informed that Caleb coughed a little and Lady Ilya slept with him until late. She was a bit exhausted after the incident, and now Edwin asked if they would have lunch together. Cedric agreed, especially because he wanted to talk to his wife. Naturally, Caleb would also have lunch with them, as he felt much better. The Duke decided to hide nothing more, and all that was left was to accept the situation. Edwin became curious about what the Lord was hiding, and asked him to share it with him first, but he told him to mind his own business. Afterward, Cedric learned from his brother that he had constant nightmares, and didn't understand why Caleb hadn't told him earlier. And the boy only thought that his attack last night might have been caused by a nightmare. And those dreams have tormented him since he returned to the dukedom. The boy apologized for not having said so sooner. He simply didn't want to worry anyone. Cedric also apologized to his brother for not realizing something was bothering him. Then they asked Caleb to tell what he dreamed about. And he, clenching his fists, declared that when he woke up he couldn't remember anything. However, recently he began to remember. And from his reaction, Ilya noticed that it was difficult for him, and she asked him not to speak if he couldn't. But the boy assured her that he felt much better now. Now he was ready to tell his brother and Ilya what he had dreamed. In every dream, Caleb watches the infinite ocean fascinated, and when he reacts, a dark sea wave already covers his feet. The boy gets scared and starts backing away, but the wave rises quickly, preventing him from escaping. His body becomes as if filled with lead, so heavy that it is impossible to move, and breathing becomes increasingly difficult. And right at the moment, when Caleb thinks he is about to drown forever, he wakes up suddenly. The boy's story sounded a bit scary, but it's just a dream. However, this time the little Duke's nightmare was different. This time, when he submerged himself in the dark and infinite sea, something strange and sinister began to approach him. He couldn't describe exactly what it was, but it resembled a dark figure with legs. Hearing what tormented the boy in his dreams, Ilya remembered something crucial. He decided to sketch the figure, as it was impossible for him to describe it in words. Soon, everyone saw something resembling a black spider, huge, confronting Caleb. It seemed very strange to Cedric, since his brother is not usually afraid of spiders. But Olivia and even Edwin were terrified by the drawing. They didn't want to dream about it. Ilya remembered what that creature covered in jet black fur and angled legs could be. At that moment, Caleb confessed that the being was not trying to hurt him. It was just approaching threateningly. However, he couldn't understand why he kept having those horrible nightmares. His brother congratulated him for his bravery in telling everything, knowing how difficult it was to remember. Ilya also encouraged him, praising him for overcoming his fear and being able to express it. She thought he was a very brave boy. Suddenly, he looked at her intently and asked permission to call her little sister. Ilya found it strange. Until now, he called her by her name, but that is because he is the future Duke. His status required it, but now everything is different, as Ilya is part of his family. And since Caleb calls Cedric brother, he wanted to call Ilya little sister. Moreover, she allowed him to address her that way before, and he hoped she wasn't against it yet. For a few seconds, Ilya remained silent, as if thinking about something important. And then she asked him to just call her Ilya, and this disconcerted him. He didn't understand why she was against it now. The young woman explained that she was used to Caleb calling her by her name and saw no reason to change anything. A little confused, the boy agreed, but it was noticeable that he was a bit hurt. And Cedric noticed that his wife's expression tensed for an instant. At that moment, they announced that a master of laws had arrived for the young master. It was lesson time, but Caleb didn't really feel like attending. An assistant approached Cedric and reminded him that he had to leave for the planned event. But the Duke believed it was more important to find the source of his brother's nightmares, who promised to talk about it later. Agreeing with his brother, Cedric promised that they would all meet together as soon as the event finished. And the boy approached Ilya, promising her they would see each other soon. Doing so, he smiled sweetly at her, implying that everything was fine now. But the girl understood that not everything was so fine, and she really wanted to help that boy. On the way to the event, Edwin asked Cedric why Ilya didn't allow him to call her sister. But then he remembered that the master doesn't like him asking unnecessary questions about the lady. However, he is very curious. He himself thought that Ilya would agree. Meanwhile, Cedric thought that this decision was somehow related to someone named Junji. Meanwhile, Ilya returned to her chambers, and Olivia noticed that the lady seemed downcast. The young woman worried that her decision might have offended Caleb. But the moment he asked her to call him brother, she felt like a dagger pierced her heart. She tried to imagine the little Duke calling her sister, and she would like to allow him to call her that. But after yesterday's events, she realized she saw Junji in him. An imbalance occurred inside her, and she wanted to do for him what she couldn't do for her brother. But if Caleb started calling her sister, he would see Junie in her for the rest of his life. Ilya understood that this couldn't be, because they were two different people. Striving to discard unnecessary thoughts, the girl wanted to see Caleb as a separate individual. So she decided to check something, and set out to take a quick look in the boys' room. Olivia was somewhat surprised by her mistress's sudden decision, and asked to accompany her lady. She added that the maids had already cleaned everything, and that after yesterday's events, it was unlikely anything remained. But recalling the original plot, Ilya was going to check something different. That creature Caleb saw in his nightmares appeared when he cursed the world after Cedric's death. It granted power to the boy in exchange for devouring his dreams. It is the great demon Mephisto. And if it really was him, Ilya wanted to find out why he had appeared precisely now. Cedric left for the temple, where he had to undergo the loyalty oath ritual. After this, he will become a full member of the indigent's family. This noble ritual is basically a curse. If he betrays the family, darkness will consume his bones and flesh. Because of this, most people rejected the rituals, but Cedric agreed to undergo it. Edwin was by his side, and the Duke later gave him another task. It sounded a bit strange for an assistant, but his lord ordered him to find out who Junji is. and Cedric explained that this name belongs to a person very dear to Aaliyah. He himself couldn't ask her directly. That's why he ordered his assistant to find out who he is. Moreover, the Duke knew nothing else, neither gender nor age, only the name. But he suspected it could be a small child and that he was his wife's brother. Edwin had to find this out very discreetly. Meanwhile, Elia was already in Caleb's room, looking under the bed. Olivia was somewhat surprised by her mistress's behavior, not understanding what she was doing. But the Duchess still didn't know what she was looking for and decided to simply inspect. There was no creature under the bed, when in the original story it lived there. Elia wanted to solve this quickly, or the boy might suffer from nightmares again. Mephisto devours the dreams of those who made a pact, causing them horrible nightmares. In the original story, Caleb became more sensitive because of this, and Aaliyah wanted to find out while he studied. Suddenly, her gaze lifted to the ceiling, where she saw something horrendous with 9 slimy eyes above the lamp. Olivia noticed nothing, but the expression on her mistress's face terrified her instantly, and Aaliyah was intrigued what the hell Mephisto was doing living in the lamp. The demon began to swing the lamp upon being discovered. Right below was an unsuspecting maid, and Elia feared for her life. She barely had time to push Olivia aside. At that moment, the lamp fell to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Clouds of dark energy swirled. The maid was terrified, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, a bright light illuminated the room, and a magic shield appeared in the air. Cedric also appeared suddenly, hugging his wife to protect her. He explained that he felt the danger and teleported to her immediately. The girl thanked him, and only then remembered that Cedric was the most powerful mage in the world. Mephisto remained on the ceiling, and Aaliyah planned to capture him alive, but was stunned to realize her husband knew that demon. Cedric began to reprimand him for endangering his brother and wife. And while Celia entered a small fit of hysteria, the Duke knew they had to capture that creature alive. Moreover, they had to do it quickly, before Olivia saw it. So Cedric locked him in a magic sphere. It now looked like a soap bubble, but that way he could hide it from prying eyes. Olivia, for her part, was worried about the fallen lamp and thought it was her fault. But Aaliyah asked her to calm down, explaining that it had only been an accident, and that she was fine. The maid still wanted to check if the lady had any injuries, and at that moment Caleb entered. Behind him appeared Edwin, panting, who had run to see if his lord was okay. When Cedric teleported, he left his assistant alone in that temple, and Caleb noticed the broken lamp. And he asked for an explanation of what happened. They explained that they had trapped the source of his nightmares, and also that this source is the great demon Mephisto, the Lord of Deceit. Cedric told all this, while Caleb and Aaliyah listened attentively. But suddenly, the girl had an epiphany. She doesn't understand how her husband knows about this, if it's the first time he sees it. Meanwhile, Caleb began to examine the bubble, astonished that a demon was inside. From his reaction, Elia guessed that the boy already knew about Mephisto's existence. But then he took the bubble in his hands and expressed his astonishment that this could be the wise Indigenia. These words left Elia completely stunned. She couldn't believe that the great demon, who gave power to Caleb, was the sage and protector of her family. The Duke explained that those who pass the ritual somehow merge with the indigents. This allows them to react more intensely to everything that happens in the dukedom. That's why Cedric instantly felt that his wife was in danger and teleported to her immediately, leaving Edwin alone, who didn't understand what was happening, and appearing in his brother's room. The Duke protected Elia from the lamp debris, under which she was trapped. He also immediately knew who was in front of him, a sage who obeyed the indigents, the great demon Mephisto, the Lord of Deceit. And now Elia was curious to know why Cedric acted that way towards Mephisto, if he knew he was a sage. But the Duke couldn't ignore that the demon dared to endanger a member of his family. At that moment, the girl found his speech very moving, but she didn't want Cedric to take risks and begged him not to do it anymore. Cedric recounted that the indigents' family obtained their title through a marriage with royalty, and their lineage is very ancient in a remote past when the world was ruled by the Elephinium Empire, the realm of the fairies. Wars with other races were common, a constant that seemed endless. And one day, during a war against the gnomes, something unexpected happened. As Cedric narrated, his brother drew so that Aaliyah could better understand the story. The Duke continued explaining that the gnomes had incredible weapons, but lacked military strategy. They failed to defeat the fairies or the humans, so they looked for alternatives and summoned a demon from the underworld to borrow its intelligence. In Caleb's drawing, the scene even looked a bit comical. The imperial family wanted to frustrate the dwarves so they couldn't win, and the indigenia family was the key to helping them in this task. Since gravity magic is the most powerful, it was ideal for fighting demons. But not even gravity magic could match the demon's power. And just before the mage was defeated, the demon proposed a deal to him. They could contain it, so he asked them to teach him gravity magic in exchange for not harming them. The demon promised that their skills would reach a new level if they accepted his offer. And that demon is none other than Mephisto. The indigenia family joined him to avoid destruction and hid him from the imperial family. They couldn't reveal that the knights sent to subdue the demon had become his servants. But rumors that the indigenia family made a pact with a demon began to circulate. That's why they made Mephisto the sage of the family, and he helped perfect their magic. Now Elia understood everything, remembering how Mephisto often trained Caleb in the novel. However, the details she heard were not described in the original novel. In the book, the demon seemed powerful and imposing, and now it is sitting in a soap bubble. And in that state, it looks more like a cotton ball. Suddenly, it turns out that Mephisto hears everything, and he is not happy that they are speaking so ill of him. The bubble burst instantly, and he demanded apologies for calling him a piece of cotton. But Caleb was not going to apologize for his words. He was the one who called him that, and he explained that Mephisto, although a sage, created problems for the future archduke. The demon shrank, like a frightened kitten, and confessed that he was just very hungry. And deciding to intervene, Elia explained that the sage should first talk to the boy. The demon did not like that a woman spoke to him with such dismissiveness, but Cedric shut him down instantly. She is his wife, but Mephisto was still annoyed that someone was ordering him around. The nine-eyed sage. Elia remembered that in the original story, the number 9 was considered the greatest. This is also why there could only be 9 magic circles. That's why Mephisto boasted so much, because by demonic nature, he had one eye for each circle. But still, Elia didn't like that creature speaking to her in that tone. She gave him a furious look, like a student who has committed a fault. The demon seemed not to admit his fault and began to grumble, different from his original behavior. Here Mephisto declared that, because of Elia, he was hungry, and called her a bad woman. But what surprised the girl the most was that Mephisto saw her as a fairy and demanded explanations. Since fairies and demons are opposite poles, immediately afterwards, he started poking her with his claw and demanded that she be thrown out. And Elia realized that neither Cedric nor Caleb suspected that she was a fairy. So she started thinking about how to calm the situation immediately, so that this creature wouldn't give her more trouble. One option was to pretend not to understand anything or remind him of his amnesia. She had to think fast, when suddenly the boy grabbed that ball of fur. Then he looked at the sage furiously and explained that he had held back until now for his brother and Elia, and he also demanded that he explain to him why Mephisto was saying those obscenities to Elia in that tone. And in an even deeper and hoarser voice, he declared that this creature had no right to call Elia simply woman. The young woman tried to calm the boy, assuring him that she was fine. But Caleb didn't understand why she was stopping him, believing that Mephisto now deserved punishment. After all, he had spoken ill of the Duchess, and the young Archduke would not forgive him. Elia was perplexed, not knowing what to say. Sometimes, when Caleb shows his other side, she remembers how reserved an antagonist he was. But the current Caleb is very different, and if Elia lifts Cedric's curse, he will not have to become a villain. At that moment, Cedric intervened and asked his hand to obey Elia and calm down. The boy agreed and let go of Mephisto, who jumped onto the Duke's shoulder, hiding behind his back. The situation was taking increasingly strange turns. And then Caleb confessed that the demon started everything, tormenting him with nightmares. And now he's getting cocky on top of it. So it's not strange that the boy got angry. And the demon wasn't even thinking of apologizing. Suddenly, Elia suggested simply giving him a good whack on the back of the neck, so he would learn some manners. Caleb loved the idea. He even suggested giving him 3 hits. Even Cedric agreed that Mephisto deserved that lesson. And he, trying to avoid such a fate, confessed that he knew another way to the Temple of Knowledge. Everyone immediately paid attention to the demon and demanded details. But he first asked to sit down and promised that they wouldn't hit him. Then he recounted that this path to the temple was different from the one currently blocked. Most people think there is only one path, but there are other ways. Elias was surprised that there were several. She only knew the one Daphne used. Caleb reminded the sage that the sanctuary is the lair of a dragon, friend of the first emperor. And he didn't deny it, adding that in this world, not only humans exist. The Duke understood that minorities also know the way to the Temple of Knowledge. A novelty for him. In Idrian, there are actually other races with their own society. Some of them are the fairies, to whom Elia belongs. There are also the dwarves, which Caleb explained with drawings. In addition, there were few dragons and their descendants. The dragon race. This is a world with humans, fairies, dwarves, and the dragon race. But the original work only talked about humans and fairies. Caleb understood that he must now meet with the minorities, but he doubts they will be friendly. Mephisto didn't see a big problem. After all, they just have to go with the fairies, although it is said that almost all of them became extinct. Because 200 years ago, when Ipricento organized the revolt, many pure fairies died. However, half-breeds and their descendants can still walk among humans. That said, the Duke looked at Elia, and she feared that he would think she was a half-breed. After all, she has pink hair and jewel eyes, which are only seen in fairies. So Elia wondered if it would be okay if, while searching for the minority, she met other fairies. Right there, Mephisto opened his mouth, trying to say that in front of the Dukes there was a pure fairy. But he didn't finish speaking. When the girl grabbed him and squeezed him like a cushion, she pretended that he was just annoying her with his complaints, and that it was not the time to stand still. They must reach the temple as soon as possible, so they must leave in search of the minority. Almost midnight, they handed the newspaper verbatim to the Empress. Her Majesty, Nelica and Pricent, asked the maid to leave it on the table. And leave. She was furious. She didn't understand why he wasn't coming to see her. And on the front page of the newspaper appeared a photo of Cedric and Elia, happy. The Empress's attention focused, above all, on the Duke's face. And she didn't know what else to do so that, once and for all, he would come to her side.